Escort her out. Now.
Rose was being thrown out.
Do not let her speak to the bride.
Grant wanted her silenced. Maya saw everything.
Aunt Rose! What is happening?
Give me the box, and this ends quietly.
The box terrified him.
Let her go.
Do not sign anything. You need to hear the truth. That man is lying to you, Maya. Your grandmother knew exactly who you would become.
Security will handle her.
His mother helped hide it.
Tell me the truth.
His grandmother left this for you. The twin sharks.
16 months earlier, it all seemed impossible. At 31, Maya had built a life that looked ordinary from the outside and meaningful to anyone who knew her. She taught at a public school on the east side of Briarwood, where she worked with children whose families had learned to measure time in appointments, bus schedules, and insurance denials. Her classroom was full of picture cards, weighted blankets, chipped tables, and little victories that never made the news. Maya knew the names of every child who hated loud rooms, every parent who had learned to apologize for arriving late, and every student who had been told, directly or indirectly, that their needs were too expensive. She had not grown up with much. Her mother, Lila, had been a reading specialist who believed that every child deserved at least one adult who saw potential before behavior. When Lila died suddenly after a brief illness, Maya was 14. Rose, Lila's older sister, had taken her in without speeches or conditions. Rose had worked night shifts as a home care nurse then, and money was always tight. But Maya never remembered feeling unwanted. She remembered packed lunches, secondhand books, birthday cakes that leaned to one side, and a woman who would stay awake until dawn after a double shift just to make sure Maya had finished her homework. Rose never pretended their life was glamorous. She taught Maya how to repair a hem, how to stretch soup across 3 dinners, how to recognize when someone was treating kindness as weakness. There was one lesson, however, that Maya had never fully understood. Rose believed that the people most eager to be admired were often the people least willing to be known. Maya used to think it was simply the wisdom of someone who had spent decades in strangers' homes, watching families perform love for visitors and abandon it when the doors closed. Then Grant Holloway arrived at her school with a camera crew, a group of foundation staff, and a donation large enough to replace the classroom equipment Maya had spent years begging the district to approve. The Holloway Foundation had been a familiar name in Briarwood for as long as Maya could remember. It funded scholarships, literacy centers, hospital wings, and polished advertisements about lifting communities through opportunity. Its founder, Eleanor Holloway, had been remembered as a stern but generous woman who turned a small family business into a philanthropic empire. After Eleanor's death, the foundation passed into the hands of her daughter, Catherine, and her grandson, Grant. They appeared in magazines, stood beside oversized checks, and spoke often about legacy. Grant entered Maya's classroom in a tailored suit that did not quite belong among finger paint and sensory toys. Yet he seemed to know exactly how to make himself fit. He knelt beside a student who had trouble making eye contact. He listened while Maya explained why a new communications device could change a child's day. He asked questions that made her believe he had actually read the proposal rather than simply approved it. By the end of the visit, he had promised not only the devices, but a small grant for teacher training across the district. Maya was careful at first. She had seen wealthy people arrive with announcements and leave before the real work began. But Grant kept returning. He attended school board meetings. He remembered the names of students. He sent handwritten notes after difficult weeks. And when he asked Maya to dinner, he did it without making her feel like a charitable project he had decided to rescue. Their relationship moved quickly, though not carelessly. Grant took Maya to quiet restaurants rather than the places reporters followed him. He listened when she talked about her students, even when the stories had no easy ending. He seemed to admire that she did not chase his money or his family name. In fact, he often said that being with her felt like stepping outside the world that expected something from him every minute of the day. Rose did not share Maya's confidence. She was polite to Grant, never openly hostile, but she watched him in a way that made him uncomfortable. She noticed how his generosity increased when a camera was nearby. She noticed that he asked Maya to send photographs whenever a new device arrived at school, then later claimed those photographs had inspired the Foundation's latest campaign. She noticed the small pauses in his expression when Maya disagreed with him, the faint tightening around his mouth when anyone failed to admire him quickly enough. Still, Rose said little. Maya had spent most of her life being underestimated because of where she came from. Rose did not want to become another person, telling her that happiness was too fragile for someone like them to trust. So she kept her concerns to herself, hoping she was wrong. For a while, it seemed she might be. Grant proposed on a winter evening beneath the lights of a small botanical garden that had been closed to the public for the night. There were no journalists, no celebrity friends, no branded banners. Maya believed that was proof the moment belonged only to them. When she said yes, Grant held her as though he had been waiting his whole life for someone who did not care about the Holloway name. The engagement changed the temperature around them almost immediately. Catherine Holloway began appearing more often, always elegant, always measured, always able to make a criticism sound like concern. She offered to manage the wedding because, as she gently suggested, a marriage into the Holloway family attracted attention, and attention required care. She selected the chapel, the guest list, the flowers, the menus, and eventually most of the people allowed to have an opinion. At first, Maya accepted this as generosity. She had never planned a wedding and did not want to be ungrateful. But Catherine's help came with a quiet process of removal. Maya's co-workers were shifted to a distant table because the room was limited. Rose was advised that a smaller family dinner before the ceremony might be more comfortable than the main reception. A photo of Maya's mother, which Maya wanted near the ceremony flowers, was described as too personal for the visual plan. Each decision seemed minor by itself. Together, they made Maya feel less like a bride and more like a detail being arranged. Grant always found a way to smooth it over. He told Maya his mother had spent her life managing public attention and did not know how to stop. He promised that once the wedding was over, they would build a life with fewer expectations and more space. Maya wanted to believe him. Every time doubt appeared, she reminded herself of the man who had sat on the floor of her classroom and listened to a child struggle to form one sentence. Rose, however, recognized something Maya did not. She had seen Catherine Holloway before, though Maya had never known it. Nearly 20 years earlier, Rose had worked as a private nurse for Eleanor Holloway during the final season of Eleanor's life. By then, Eleanor was no longer the towering public figure people admired from newspaper photographs. She was ill, exhausted, and increasingly troubled by things happening inside the Foundation that carried her name. Rose had been hired because Eleanor wanted someone outside the family. She had told the agency that she needed a nurse who could be trusted not to confuse employment with loyalty to Catherine or Grant. Rose had not understood the significance of that request until the nights when Eleanor could not sleep. On those nights, the old woman spoke less about death than betrayal. She had built the Holloway Foundation to keep children from being discarded by systems that found them inconvenient. Yet she had begun to suspect that her own family was using the foundation as a stage set, moving money through polished programs while the people in greatest need were removed from the picture. Eleanor never gave Rose every detail. She was too careful for that. But she did ask Rose to keep a cedar box hidden where Catherine would never think to look. She told her that the box contained what mattered if the family ever tried to turn compassion into a costume. Rose had promised without understanding how expensive that promise would become. After Eleanor died, Catherine claimed that the final estate documents had been settled. The foundation continued, and Grant grew into its public face. Rose received no invitation to the funeral reception. She kept the box in the back of a linen cabinet for years, telling herself that perhaps the danger Eleanor feared had passed. Then Grant began dating Maya. The first warning came 6 weeks before the wedding, when Rose visited Maya's apartment and found a stack of documents waiting to be signed. Maya had been told they were standard papers connected to her future role at the foundation. Grant wanted her to become the public education ambassador after the honeymoon. He said her work with children made her the perfect person to lead a new initiative. Rose read only a few pages before her hands began to shake. Buried beneath language about reputation, privacy, and coordinated communication was a clause preventing Maya from making public statements about foundation activities without written approval. There were financial penalties, confidentiality rules, and restrictions that would follow her even if she stepped away from the role. It was not a partnership agreement, it was a leash. That night, Rose went home, opened the linen cabinet, and took out the cedar box for the first time in almost 2 decades. Inside, beneath a yellowing knit scarf Eleanor had once used to wrap the documents, were pages bearing the old woman's signature, a sealed letter addressed to Rose, and a thin ledger written in a disciplined hand. The first page of the letter made one thing painfully clear. Eleanor had not asked Rose to protect a fortune. She had asked her to protect people. And if the day came when a Holloway tried to use marriage, charity, or public admiration to silence someone vulnerable, Rose was to make sure the truth reached the light. Rose had no idea how close that day was until the morning of Maya's wedding. The morning of the wedding arrived under a hard, bright sky that made every window of the Holloway estate shine. By 7 o'clock, the chapel garden was already filled with florists, caterers, stylists, photographers, and assistants carrying clipboards. The place looked less like a home than a machine built to manufacture a perfect memory. Every rose had been inspected. Every candle had been placed at the correct height. Every place card had been checked twice. And in the center of it all, Maya was being prepared to marry the man everyone insisted had given her a life beyond anything she could have imagined. Rose arrived alone just after 9. She wore the blue dress Maya had helped her choose, a simple coat against the morning chill, and the old cedar box tucked inside a canvas bag. She had spent the night reading Eleanor's letter until the words blurred. There was no instruction telling her to interrupt a wedding, no sentence ordering her to humiliate Grant or expose the family in front of strangers. Eleanor had only asked her to act before another innocent person became part of a lie. That difference mattered to Rose. She did not want revenge. She did not even want to ruin Grant. What frightened her was the thought of Maya spending years trying to understand why the man she loved had slowly taken control of her voice, her work, and her memories of what was right. Rose had watched that happen to women before. It rarely began with cruelty that anyone else could see. It began with decisions made on their behalf, concerns dismissed as stress, and gratitude demanded in exchange for a comfortable cage. Catherine saw Rose before Maya did. Her eyes moved to the canvas bag, then to Rose's shoes, then to the anxious way Rose searched the corridor for someone who could take her to the bridal room. Catherine greeted her with polished restraint, but the message beneath her manners was immediate. Rose had not been expected to arrive so early, and the family could not allow distractions on a day meant to be photographed from every angle. Rose asked to speak with Maya privately. Catherine explained that the bride was overwhelmed and could not be disturbed. Rose said the matter could not wait. Catherine's expression barely changed, but she sent an assistant to find Grant. Grant appeared several minutes later in his formal suit, surrounded by the calm authority of someone accustomed to people making space for him. At first, he treated Rose like an inconvenience that could be managed. He suggested she give Maya the box after the ceremony. He reminded her that the bride had enough emotions to handle. He implied that an old family matter could surely wait until the guests had gone home. Then Rose told him that the box had belonged to Eleanor. The change in Grant was small, but Rose had spent enough years at bedsides to recognize the body's betrayal of the mind. His shoulders tightened, his gaze dropped toward the bag, and returned too quickly. For a moment, the careful warmth in his face disappeared. He asked Rose what exactly Eleanor had given her. Rose did not answer. She only said that Maya needed to see it before signing anything connected to the Holloway Foundation. That was when Grant stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding. He spoke to Rose in the low, controlled manner of a man who knew anger would look bad if anyone overheard. He suggested that grief could distort old memories. He implied that she might be confused by documents she did not understand. He warned her that upsetting Maya on her wedding day would be unforgivable. Rose had heard sharper words in hospital rooms, usually from families who had mistaken fear for authority. She told him that a person who feared the truth before a marriage had no right to ask for trust after it. Grant's face hardened. He did not order the guards to remove her immediately. Not then. He knew that would draw attention. Instead, he asked one of Catherine's assistants to escort Rose to a side lounge and promised that Maya would join her when she was ready. It was a softer form of exile, designed to look considerate. For 20 minutes, Rose sat alone in a room decorated with cream-colored furniture she was afraid to touch. Outside the door, footsteps passed without stopping. The wedding moved forward as though she had already been erased from it. She could hear distant music being tested in the chapel and the low murmur of guests arriving. With every minute, she felt the old weight of hesitation return. Perhaps Maya deserved a quiet day. Perhaps Rose was about to damage the one thing her niece had allowed herself to want. Then she remembered Lila. She remembered Maya at 14, trying to be brave at a funeral because she thought crying would make Rose's burden heavier. She remembered every time Maya had stood up for a child who had been treated as difficult rather than deserving. and she realized that protecting Maya's peace by hiding the truth was not protection at all. It was surrender. Rose left the lounge and headed toward the bridal corridor. The assistant tried to stop her. Rose apologized and kept walking. Catherine saw her approaching and immediately understood what was happening. Grant had just taken his place near the chapel entrance, where the first guests could see him. To anyone watching, he looked composed and proud. But when Rose reached the corridor, his composure cracked. Maya was only a few doors away, surrounded by bridesmaids and makeup artists. She heard raised voices, then stepped into the hall before someone could close the door. Her wedding dress caught the morning light, and for a second, Rose saw the little girl she had raised, dressed for a future Rose had once believed would be safe. Grant moved between them. He told Maya that Rose was tired and upset, that she had become confused about an old matter related to his grandmother. He made it sound merciful, as though he were protecting both women from embarrassment. Maya looked at Rose, waiting for her aunt to deny it or explain. Rose tried to reach into the bag. Grant caught her wrist. It was not a violent movement. That was what made it worse. It was quick, controlled, almost invisible. But Maya saw it. She saw the way Rose flinched. She saw the anger in Grant's eyes before he replaced it with concern. And something inside her shifted. Grant released Rose immediately and tried to draw Maya away from the moment. He reminded her that hundreds of guests were arriving. He spoke about timing, pressure, and how much stress Rose must be under. He made the entire situation sound like a fragile inconvenience that Maya had the duty to manage. Maya asked Rose whether she needed help. Rose looked at her, then at Grant, and made a decision that broke her own heart. She told Maya that she did, but that the truth could not be spoken in a hallway full of people who wanted it hidden. Catherine called security. What happened next was the moment that would later be described in different ways by every person who had witnessed it. Some guests would say Rose refused to cooperate. Others would insist the guards were only guiding her outside. Catherine would claim the family had been concerned for Rose's well-being. Grant would tell anyone who listened that he had tried to protect Maya from a painful misunderstanding. But Maya remembered the facts. She remembered Rose clutching the cedar box. She remembered the guards treating a 68-year-old woman as though dignity were something that could be removed by force. She remembered Grant watching instead of stopping them. And she remembered the hollow feeling that came when a person she loved showed her, without realizing it, who they were. Rose was taken through the side doors and into the driveway. The music inside the chapel swelled. The wedding coordinator hurried Maya toward the room where she was supposed to wait until the processional. Everyone spoke at once, telling her there was no need to worry, no need to ruin the day, no need to let Rose's confusion become a disaster. Maya let them lead her for several steps. Then she stopped. The word disaster lingered in her mind. It was the same word Grant had used 3 weeks earlier when one of his Foundation employees had tried to meet with him after being dismissed. Maya had asked what happened, and Grant had said the employee was creating a disaster because she had misunderstood how professional organizations worked. At the time, Maya had accepted the explanation. Now she remembered the coldness behind it. She looked down at her hands and noticed something folded beneath the white ribbon of her bouquet. Rose must have slipped it there when Grant had grabbed her wrist. It was a single page torn from Eleanor's letter. Maya read it in the quiet of the preparation room while her bridesmaids watched her face change. The handwriting was weak but clear. Eleanor had written that there were people who called themselves guardians of a legacy, while feeding on the very trust they were supposed to protect. She had written that the family's greatest danger was not scandal, but the habit of teaching others to confuse wealth with virtue. And near the bottom of the page, she had left a warning addressed not to Maya by name, but to whoever might one day be asked to marry into the Holloway world. Never sign away your voice in exchange for a place at their table. Maya read the sentence twice. Then she asked her bridesmaids to leave. For the first time all morning, no one told her what the next step should be. Outside, Grant was taking his place near the altar. He believed Rose had been removed. He believed the box was still in her hands, but far enough away to handle after the ceremony. He believed Maya had been surrounded by enough pressure, beauty, and expectation to keep her moving forward. He did not understand that the best thing Rose had ever given Maya was not shelter, food, or even love. It was the ability to recognize the moment when silence became a betrayal. Maya removed her veil, not because she had decided anything yet, but because she needed to see clearly. Then she left the room through the service hallway, past the floral displays and polished mirrors, and walked toward the driveway where Rose was waiting beside the car that had brought her there. The ceremony had not begun, but the marriage was already over. Rose was sitting on the low stone wall near the estate driveway when Maya found her. The security men had stepped back once they realized the bride was walking toward them, but they remained close enough to remind Rose that even outside the chapel, the Holloway family believed they could decide where she belonged. For a few seconds, neither woman spoke. Maya stood in her wedding dress without a veil, carrying a bouquet she no longer knew what to do with. Rose looked smaller than she had that morning, not because she was weak, but because the years of keeping Eleanor's secret had suddenly become visible in the curve of her shoulders. Maya sat beside her and reached for the cedar box. Rose did not hand it over immediately. She asked Maya to understand that whatever happened next had to be Maya's choice. Rose had not come to command her, to punish Grant, or to turn one terrible morning into the only definition of Maya's life. She had come because a marriage could survive disappointment, fear, even ordinary mistakes. It could not survive a foundation built on contempt. Then she opened the box. Inside was the original third codicil to Eleanor Holloway's will, signed before 2 independent witnesses and sealed by a small legal practice outside Briarwood. It had never appeared in the estate papers Catherine presented after Eleanor died. The document did not take every dollar from the Holloway family or hand Rose some secret fortune. Its purpose was more precise. Eleanor had placed the voting control of the foundation into a protective trust, to be activated if a member of her family used the organization to conceal fraud, retaliate against employees, or coerce another person into surrendering their voice for the sake of the Holloway name. Rose had also kept a ledger Eleanor compiled during the last months of her life. It tracked grants that were publicly announced but never fully delivered, contracts redirected through companies controlled by Catherine's friends, and scholarships that disappeared from internal lists after the cameras had gone. The final pages contained names. They were not the names of powerful people. They belonged to teachers, community coordinators, social workers, and former foundation employees who had tried to raise concerns and had been quietly pushed out. There was one name Maya recognized at once. It belonged to a woman named Helena Ward, a former director of the Holloway Education Initiative. 3 weeks earlier, Grant had called Helena a disgruntled employee who had tried to create problems after losing her position. Maya had believed him because she wanted to believe him. But the ledger showed that Helena had objected to funds being moved out of school programs and into a marketing campaign designed around Grant's public image. Her dismissal had not been a misunderstanding. It had been retaliation. At the bottom of the box lay the agreement Grant wanted Maya to sign after the wedding. Rose had found a copy among documents left at Maya's apartment. Eleanor's letter explained why it mattered. Grant was not simply inviting Maya to become an ambassador for the foundation. He wanted her to become the moral face of a new campaign while binding her to confidentiality terms that would make it difficult for her to speak if she discovered what the family had done. Maya held the papers in her lap. The chapel bells began to ring behind them, a signal that the ceremony should be starting. For years, she had thought love meant believing in the best version of someone until they proved otherwise. But looking at the documents, she understood that Grant had already proved otherwise. She had simply been given reasons to look away. Rose told her there was one more thing Maya needed to know. Before coming to the wedding, Rose had sent copies of every document to the legal practice named in Eleanor's codicil and to the 3 independent trustees Eleanor had selected long ago. Rose had delayed for years because the evidence alone had not been enough to show the full pattern. But Grant's attempt to bind Maya to silence, combined with his treatment of Rose that morning, had made the pattern impossible to deny. Maya could not undo what Grant had done. She could not bring back the employees who had lost their jobs, or the children whose programs had been cut while the Holloways posed for photographs. But she could refuse to become the next polished layer over the truth. She stood and took Rose's hand. When they walked back into the chapel, the guests turned toward them with the curiosity of people who had waited too long without an explanation. Grant was at the altar beneath an arch of white flowers, looking composed, but increasingly irritated. Catherine sat in the front row, her face fixed in the expression of someone prepared to call anything inconvenient a misunderstanding. Maya did not rush. She did not let the wedding coordinator guide her into position. She walked down the aisle beside Rose, not because Rose needed to be rescued, but because neither of them would be separated again to make someone else comfortable. Grant tried to meet Maya with concern. He made the expression of a man ready to forgive a bride for panicking under pressure. He moved toward her, as though the only obstacle between them was a private emotional moment that could be smoothed over with the right words. Maya stopped several feet away. She told him, before their families and the people who had come to admire them, that there would be no wedding. She said she could not marry a man who treated her aunt's dignity as an inconvenience. She could not marry someone who used charity to build his image while hiding the harm done to the people who trusted him. And she would not sign away her voice so that the Holloway family could keep calling itself generous. The room did not explode into chaos. Real shock rarely does. It arrived as stillness. Grant's first instinct was to deny everything. He insisted that Rose had misunderstood old documents and that Maya had been manipulated on an emotional day. He suggested that the papers belonged in the hands of lawyers, not guests. In a narrow sense, he was right. The documents did belong with lawyers. That was exactly where Rose had already sent them. But Grant made one mistake. In trying to diminish Rose, he revealed the same contempt that had brought them all to that moment. He described her as a former employee who had spent too long attached to the family's past. He spoke as though years of service made her less credible, not more. Several people in the room looked at one another. Some had worked with the foundation. Some had seen the polished version of Grant for years. And suddenly, they remembered the staff members who had vanished The programs announced with fanfare and then quietly abandoned. The questions that had never received answers. Catherine rose from her seat and tried to take control. She suggested postponing the ceremony, moving the discussion somewhere private, protecting Maya from further embarrassment. But Maya understood the language now. Private had always meant hidden. Protected had always meant silenced. She placed the cedar box on the front pew and walked out of the chapel with Rose. The photographs later showed the moment in a way no one could have planned. The bride was still wearing white, but she was not crying. Rose was still carrying her worn canvas bag. Behind them, the flowers, musicians, and imported decorations remained exactly where they had been placed. Expensive proof that beauty could not save a lie once the truth had entered the room. The fallout did not happen in one dramatic afternoon. It happened through letters, audits, meetings, frozen accounts, and people finally realizing they were no longer alone. Within 48 hours, the independent trustees filed for an emergency review of the Holloway Foundation. The legal practice confirmed the authenticity of Eleanor's codicil. Grant's public role was suspended, while outside auditors examined the records, and Catherine resigned from the board before the trustees could vote to remove her. The family's public relations team called it a dispute over estate documents, but that explanation collapsed when former employees began sharing their own records. Helena Ward came forward first, with years of emails showing that Grant's office had delayed grants until media campaigns could be arranged. A regional coordinator described programs cut because the children they served did not fit the right image. A finance manager produced instructions to classify image-building expenses as community outreach. The Holloways had protected themselves by making each person believe their experience was isolated. Once those people compared their records, the pattern was impossible to deny. The investigation found that Grant had inherited a culture of manipulation from Catherine and had learned to make it look modern, polished, and strategic. But he had intensified it. He planned to make Maya the face of an education campaign because her sincerity gave him what money could not buy: credibility. Grant had spent years deciding which children were visible enough to deserve help. In the end, his future depended on the testimony of people he had tried to make invisible. The Protective Trust took control of the foundation's voting rights. It rebuilt the board with teachers, community representatives, former program staff, and independent financial oversight. Grants were reviewed, neglected programs were restored where possible, and the people who had been ignored were finally given a chance to speak before decisions were made again. Grant faced civil cases, financial inquiries, lost partnerships, and the collapse of the public platform he had treated as proof of his worth. More painful to him than the money was the loss of control. For the first time, he could not shape the narrative with a smile, a speech, or a carefully placed photograph. Catherine watched the family name become a symbol of everything Eleanor had tried to prevent. She was undone, not by a stranger, but by the records of the woman she had dismissed as powerless. Rose did not become rich or accept a seat at the head of the foundation. She returned to her small apartment and neighborhood clinic, but the trustees asked her to serve as a community advisor. She agreed only if teachers and families had more influence than donors. Maya took time away from work after the wedding that never happened. She grieved the man she thought Grant was, the future she had imagined, and the embarrassment of having nearly walked into a life designed to shrink her. But she did not regret leaving. She learned that heartbreak was not proof of weakness. Sometimes it was proof that a person had chosen truth before comfort. Months later, Maya returned to her classroom. The room still had chipped tables, picture cards, and students who needed more help than the system could easily provide. But the Holloway Foundation, now under new oversight, funded the program without camera crews or branding requirements. Maya refused the title of ambassador when the trustees offered it. She chose instead to help create a teacher-led advisory group that no single wealthy family could control. On the first day the new devices arrived, Maya watched one of her students use a communication screen to tell his mother that he was happy. It was a small sentence. No newspaper printed it. No donor stood nearby to claim credit. Yet Maya thought of Eleanor, of Rose, and of all the people whose names had been hidden in a ledger because someone believed their lives were not impressive enough to matter. That was the lesson Grant Holloway never understood. A person's value is not measured by the room they are allowed to enter, the clothes they can afford, or the power they seem to hold. It is measured by what they do when someone else's dignity is placed in their hands. And sometimes, the person everyone tries to remove from the room is the only one carrying the truth that can save it. If this story moved you, remember this. Never confuse polished appearances with good character. The way someone treats those they believe cannot help them will always reveal more than the words they use in public. Flight 718 entered the storm.
Captain's down! I need help!
Lightning tore across the cabin.
Everyone stay seated.
Then the captain collapsed.
Captain, stay with me!
All 186 lives held still.
Can anyone here fly this aircraft?
From seat 34B, Maya stood.
I can help.
She had no uniform or badge, only an old leather bag and a name the airline feared.
He said she could not fly.
She was fired for a reason.
3 years earlier, Maya wore captain stripes.
Sign the report, then walk away.
It started with one missing number.
The records don't match.
But to understand why Graham Voss was more afraid of Maya Reed than of the storm outside, we have to go back 3 years, to the morning she first noticed a single missing number in an aircraft maintenance record. At the time, Maya still wore the Aurora Skies uniform with pride. She had earned every stripe on it the difficult way. There had been no family money paying for flight hours, no powerful relatives opening doors, and no easy path from the neighborhood where she grew up to the left seat of a commercial aircraft. Her father, Daniel Reed, had spent most of his life working beneath airplanes rather than inside them. He was an avionics technician, one of those men passengers never saw, but depended on every time a plane rose above the clouds. Daniel had taught Maya that aircraft did not become dangerous all at once. A disaster rarely began with fire, smoke, or a screaming alarm. More often, it began with one small shortcut that nobody wanted to question. A number entered incorrectly. A warning cleared too quickly. A part marked as replaced when it had only been reset. A supervisor deciding that a delay would cost more than a risk. When Maya was a little girl, she used to sit beside him in the garage while he repaired radios, test panels, and old electrical equipment from the hangar. He would place a wiring diagram in front of her and explain that every line had a purpose. Even the smallest connection mattered because machines did not care whether people were tired, impatient, rich, or powerful. A system either worked properly or it did not. Those lessons stayed with Maya long after she became a pilot. She was never the loudest captain at Aurora Skies, She did not enjoy drawing attention to herself. She did not try to impress crews by acting fearless. What made her respected was the fact that she prepared more carefully than anyone expected. She studied weather patterns before every flight. She read maintenance notes instead of skipping past them. She listened to ground crews. She checked again when something did not make sense. That habit had saved passengers from minor trouble more than once. A faulty cargo warning, an incorrect fuel figure, a hydraulic message that turned out to be nothing serious. Most people in the company saw those delays as inconveniences. Maya saw them as proof that carefulness was not paranoia. Then came Flight 216 from Dallas to Phoenix. It was an ordinary overnight route. The passengers were tired. The cabin crew wanted an on-time departure. The weather was clear, and the aircraft had already been delayed once because of a late inbound connection. It should have been a simple flight, the kind people forgot the moment they landed. But while reviewing the maintenance log, Maya noticed that an electrical distribution unit had been marked as replaced during the previous week. The entry looked complete at first glance. The date was there. The technician's name was there. The maintenance release was signed. Only one thing was missing: the serial number of the replacement unit. For most people, it would have meant nothing. A missing number in a long page of technical records could easily be a clerical mistake. But Maya knew that components like that were tracked for a reason. A part's serial number told the company where it came from, how old it was, what service history it carried, and whether it had been connected to previous incidents. She asked the ground maintenance team to verify the record. The technician checked the paperwork, then checked again. He looked uncomfortable. He told Maya the part had been inspected and the aircraft was safe to fly. Maya did not accuse him of lying. She did not raise her voice. She simply asked to see the replacement documentation. It was not available. She asked for the maintenance supervisor. The supervisor arrived irritated, already aware that passengers were waiting at the gate. He explained that the component had been dealt with, that the issue was minor, and that the aircraft had completed several flights since then without any problems. Maya understood the pressure. Every minute on the ground cost the airline money. Every delay created complaints. Every cancellation turned into a report that climbed upward through management. But an aircraft was not safer because it had been lucky. She refused to sign the release until the records were verified. The flight was delayed. Passengers complained. Gate agents apologized. The company's operations center called repeatedly. By the time the documents finally arrived, the problem had been explained away as a simple database error. The part had supposedly been replaced correctly, and the missing number had supposedly been omitted during a system transfer. Maya allowed the flight to continue only after the aircraft passed a more detailed inspection. It landed safely in Phoenix. But Maya could not forget the feeling she had when she looked at that incomplete record. Over the next several months, she started noticing similar inconsistencies across Aurora Skies' older fleet. A repeated electrical warning that disappeared after a reset. A maintenance sign-off completed at a time when the technician had been assigned to another airport. Components marked as replaced without a matching inventory transfer. Aircraft that seemed to suffer the same minor problems again and again, but never long enough to trigger a formal grounding. At first, Maya believed the airline had a paperwork problem. Then she began to suspect that it had a safety problem. The more she looked, the more patterns appeared. The aircraft involved were not random. Many belonged to the same group of older planes that had been modified during a cost-cutting program. Several had used components supplied by a contractor called Horizon Avionics Solutions. The company had been praised publicly for helping Aurora Skies reduce maintenance expenses and improve turnaround time. But Daniel Reed had once warned Maya about companies that made their profits by promising that expensive problems could disappear cheaply. He had told her that the cheapest part was often the most expensive one in the long run. Maya compiled everything she found into a formal safety report. She was careful. She did not write with anger. She did not make accusations she could not prove. She listed the aircraft numbers, the dates, the recurring warnings, the incomplete records, and the supplier details. Then she requested an independent audit. For 2 weeks, no one responded. At first, she assumed the report had been lost in the system. Then she received an invitation to a private meeting with Aurora Skies management. That was where she met Graham Voss for the first time. Back then, Voss was not yet the chief executive officer. He was the airline's chief operations strategist, a title that sounded technical enough to be trusted and vague enough to hide the power behind it. He was known for saving money without appearing cruel. He had a talent for making difficult decisions sound reasonable. Investors liked him because profits rose wherever he went. Executives liked him because he never created public scandals. Employees feared him because people who crossed him often found themselves quietly removed from the path ahead. Maya entered the meeting room believing someone had finally taken her concerns seriously. Voss greeted her warmly. He praised her flight record. He spoke about her discipline, her professionalism, and the fact that Aurora Skies needed pilots who cared deeply about safety. Then the tone shifted. He suggested that Maya had become too emotionally invested in technical details outside her direct area of responsibility. He explained that maintenance teams had already reviewed the issue. He reminded her that pilots and engineers needed to trust one another. He implied that her persistence was creating tension inside the company. Nothing he said sounded openly threatening. That was what made it dangerous. By the end of the meeting, Maya realized that Voss was not trying to understand her report. He was trying to make her doubt it. He wanted her to believe that asking questions had made her difficult. He wanted her to believe that being careful had made her disruptive. He wanted her to feel ashamed for caring more about the truth than the company's image. Maya left the meeting unsettled, but she did not withdraw the report. Instead, she filed a second one. That was when Aurora Skies stopped treating her as an employee and began treating her as a problem. Within weeks, Maya was removed from active flight duty pending an internal review. No one explained what the review involved. No one gave her a clear timeline. She was asked to attend meetings where people spoke around the issue without ever addressing it directly. Her supervisors became distant. Colleagues who once trusted her stopped returning messages. Then the rumors began. Anonymous sources told aviation websites that a captain at Aurora Skies had repeatedly caused delays by overreacting to minor maintenance concerns. Industry forums began discussing an unnamed pilot who had supposedly clashed with ground crews. A columnist wrote about the danger of allowing personal anxiety to influence professional judgment. Maya's name was not mentioned at first. It did not need to be. Inside the airline, everyone knew who the story was about. Months later, when Aurora Skies finally released its decision, the company did not accuse Maya of misconduct. They did not claim she had broken any regulation. They did not say she was unqualified. They used softer words. They stated that her employment had ended because of concerns about professional collaboration and operational judgment. It was enough. Her licenses remained valid. Her training record remained strong. But no major airline wanted to hire a pilot whose former company had quietly labeled her a risk. Maya appealed. She requested access to the maintenance records that had prompted her report. She contacted regulators. She spoke to lawyers. But every path seemed to lead back to the same invisible wall. The airline insisted that its fleet was safe. The records she requested were delayed, restricted, or declared confidential. Her report was marked as unsubstantiated. The company moved on, and so did everyone else, except Maya. She did not stop believing that something was wrong. She simply ran out of people willing to listen. The hardest part was not losing the uniform. It was losing the future she had spent her entire life building. For years, she had imagined the first day she would become a captain. She had imagined the weight of the jacket on her shoulders, the sound of her name spoken over the cabin speakers, and the quiet pride on her father's face when he saw her standing beside an aircraft. Daniel Reed had lived long enough to see her earn that title, but he did not live long enough to see what Aurora Skies did to her. He had died a year before Maya filed the report, leaving behind a small metal case filled with old notes, component numbers, supplier records, and handwritten observations from his own years in aviation. At the time, Maya had thought of it only as a piece of him she could not bear to throw away. She carried that case everywhere, not because she believed it contained the answer to anything, but because it reminded her that someone had once taught her not to look away when the truth became inconvenient. After Aurora Skies pushed her out, Maya took whatever work she could find. She taught emergency procedures at a simulator center outside the city. She trained student pilots who dreamed of flying for airlines one day. She showed them how to handle engine failures, severe weather, rapid descents, and instrument malfunctions. At night, after the students went home, Maya sometimes stayed behind. She would sit alone in the simulator, surrounded by artificial screens and plastic controls, looking at a runway that was not real and listening to a wind that did not exist. She still knew every procedure. She still remembered every call-out. She still dreamed about flying. But she no longer believed the industry would ever allow her back into a real cockpit. That was why she had booked the cheapest seat she could find on Aurora Skies Flight 718. She was traveling to an interview for a small training position in another state. The job did not offer prestige. It did not offer a captain's salary. It did not even guarantee that she would ever fly a real aircraft again. But it offered something she had almost stopped expecting: a reason to stay close to the sky. She had boarded the flight quietly, kept her head down, and chosen seat 34B near the back. She had no idea Graham Voss would be sitting in first class. She had no idea Captain Luis Herrera would collapse. She had no idea that the aircraft would enter a storm, carrying the exact kind of danger she had tried to expose. But when the cabin lights flickered and the first warning chime sounded, Maya felt something old awaken inside her. Not panic. Recognition. The sound was wrong. The pattern was wrong. And when Nora Bell asked if anyone on board knew how to fly, Maya had understood that remaining silent would be the same as helping the lie survive. So she stood. Now, as Nora guided her toward the cockpit, Maya could feel the eyes of the passengers following her. Some looked hopeful. Some looked afraid. A few looked at her with the same suspicion Graham Voss had planted in the cabin only moments earlier. But Maya did not look back. She had spent 3 years trying to prove that she belonged in the sky. This time, she did not need anyone's permission. The cockpit door opened. The air inside was cold and sharp. Rain hammered against the windshield. Captain Herrera lay unconscious in the left seat, while 2 passengers with medical training worked beside him. Evan Cole, the first officer, was gripping the controls with both hands, trying to manage the aircraft, the weather, the warning systems, and his own fear all at once. Maya stepped forward. Then she looked at the maintenance display. For 1 second, everything inside her went still. The aircraft registration number glowing on the screen was one she knew. It belonged to one of the exact planes listed in the report Aurora Skies had buried 3 years earlier. And suddenly, Maya understood that the storm was not the only thing trying to bring Flight 718 down. The moment the cockpit door closed behind Maya Reed, the storm stopped being something she could watch from a passenger window. It became a living force that pressed against every surface around her. Rain struck the windshield in violent sheets. Lightning turned the cockpit white for half a second at a time. Warning tones rose and disappeared beneath the growl of the engines, while the aircraft shuddered through air that no longer felt stable. Captain Luis Herrera sat motionless in the left seat, his eyes closed, his body held in place by the harness. He had collapsed only minutes earlier, leaving Evan Cole, the young first officer, alone with a medical emergency, severe weather, and a panel of instruments that seemed to be losing faith in themselves one screen at a time. Evan did not look like the kind of pilot who had ever imagined failure. He was trained, polished, and careful. He had spent years learning procedures, memorizing limitations, and proving that he belonged in the right seat of a commercial jet. But training had a way of becoming something very different. When the cockpit was dark, the captain was unconscious, and 186 lives were sitting behind a locked door. Maya understood that fear. She had known it long before Aurora Skies had taken her uniform, her cockpit, and the career she had once believed would define her life. Fear was not always loud. Sometimes it sat quietly in the room, hiding behind a steady voice and a professional posture, waiting for one small failure to become another. She did not begin by trying to take control of everything. That would have been useless. Evan was still flying the aircraft. The engines were still running. The airplane still had a path through the storm, even if that path was narrowing by the second. What Evan needed was not someone to make him feel smaller. He needed someone who could separate the emergency into pieces small enough to survive. Maya told him to stay with the essentials: airspeed, altitude, direction. Nothing else mattered until those things were secure. The rest of the cockpit could flash, chime, and threaten all it wanted. Panic would come from trying to solve every problem at once. Survival would come from handling the next problem first. For a few seconds, Evan's breathing slowed. His hands remained tight around the controls, but they stopped moving with the helpless urgency of someone searching for a miracle. Maya watched him settle into the rhythm of the work. He was still frightened. He was still young, but he was listening. Outside the cockpit, Nora Bell moved through the cabin with the kind of calm that could only come from someone who understood how much people needed to borrow courage from another person. She did not promise the passengers that everything would be fine. Promises were dangerous at 37,000 feet. Instead, she gave them instructions, routines, and the steady presence of someone who refused to let fear become contagious. Most of the passengers did not know exactly what had happened. They only knew that the captain had stopped speaking. The lights had flickered, and the storm outside looked less like weather and more like a wall. Some held hands with strangers. Some stared at the ceiling as if the aircraft might answer their questions. Some prayed in silence. And in first class, Graham Voss sat surrounded by comfort that suddenly meant nothing. Voss had spent his life believing that every crisis could be controlled by the right person in the right room. He knew how to make nervous investors feel confident. He knew how to turn bad press into reassuring language. He knew how to bury a problem beneath legal statements and polished smiles. But the cockpit of Flight 718 was not a boardroom. It did not care who owned the company, who had influence, or who could afford the best attorneys. The storm did not recognize titles, and for the first time in years, Graham Voss was trapped in a place where the woman he had tried to erase was more valuable than he was. Maya studied the flickering displays, while Evan followed the emergency procedures. A navigation screen went dark, returned, then began showing incomplete information. One electrical warning appeared and disappeared. Another followed. The failures were not dramatic enough to look like a total collapse, but they were too strange to ignore. They came in bursts, almost as if the aircraft were trying to tell them something and could not decide whether it had the strength to keep speaking. Then Maya saw the aircraft registration number on a small maintenance screen. For one moment, the storm disappeared from her mind. She knew that aircraft, not because she had flown it often, but because she had seen its records before. 3 years earlier, when she had still worn Aurora Sky's captain's stripes, she had found a missing number in a maintenance report tied to an electrical replacement. At the time, it had looked like a small inconsistency, a missing serial number, a skipped verification line, a document that seemed to have been cleaned too carefully. But Maya had learned from her father that the smallest missing detail could carry the largest warning. Daniel Reed had worked around aircraft systems for most of his life. He was not famous. He did not have a high-ranking office or a seat in executive meetings. He was simply the kind of technician who noticed what other people ignored. He noticed when parts were listed as new, but carried the wear of older units. He noticed when records were signed too quickly. He noticed when aircraft behaved differently after rain, after heavy electrical demand, or after long hours in difficult weather. He had never believed that danger announced itself loudly. Most danger, he used to say, began as something people found convenient to overlook. Maya had carried that lesson with her into every cockpit she had ever entered. And now, as she watched the displays flicker on Flight 718, she understood something that made her chest tighten. The storm had not created the problem. The storm had forced it into the open. She asked Nora to bring the worn leather bag from her seat in row 34B. Nora did not ask why. She had seen enough in Maya's face to understand that this was not a request made out of fear. It was a request made because Maya had found a thread, and she intended to follow it. While Nora made her way through the cabin, Evan reported the aircraft status to air traffic control. He declared the medical emergency. He reported the electrical failures. He requested priority handling. His voice was still strained, but it had changed. It no longer sounded like someone waiting to be rescued. It sounded like someone beginning to believe he might be able to help rescue others. Then Aurora Sky's operations called the cockpit. At first, the voice on the radio sounded controlled and professional. The operations representative asked about the captain's condition, the instrument failures, and the aircraft's ability to continue. But then came a question that did not belong in an emergency call. They asked whether Maya Reed was in the cockpit. For a moment, the storm seemed quieter. Evan looked toward Maya. Nora, who had returned with the leather bag, stood near the cockpit door and understood immediately that the company had not learned Maya's name by accident. Graham Voss had already made his calls. He had already started trying to shape the story before the aircraft had even touched the ground. Maya had once been afraid of what her name could do to her. She had watched it become a warning whispered in airline offices. She had watched former colleagues avoid her because defending her might make them inconvenient too. She had watched her career become a rumor that other people used to protect themselves, but the storm had stripped away every reason to be afraid. She told operations the truth. She was a former Aurora Skies captain with experience on that aircraft type. She was assisting the first officer during an active medical emergency. The aircraft needed priority. The crew needed a safe runway. Nothing else mattered. The operations representative suggested a diversion to a larger company-controlled airport farther away, where Aurora Skies could send its own staff and manage the emergency privately. It sounded reasonable to anyone who did not understand what the aircraft was telling them. But Maya understood. A farther airport meant more time inside the storm. More time meant more moisture, more electrical demand, more chances for the unstable system to fail again. And a company-controlled airport would give Graham Voss more time to gather people, shape records, and decide which version of the truth the world would hear first. Maya did not argue emotionally. She did not mention Voss. She did not make accusations over an open radio frequency. She simply explained the facts to Evan, and Evan made the decision that mattered. Graybridge Field was closer. Graybridge Field had a runway long enough for the aircraft if the approach remained stable. Graybridge Field had emergency crews ready, and Graybridge Field was the safest option they had. The controller confirmed the diversion. That was the moment Graham Voss began to lose control. Behind the cockpit door, he could still make phone calls. He could still speak to company lawyers and senior executives. He could still try to convince himself that the situation could be contained. But every minute, Flight 718 moved toward Graybridge Field. The possibility of containment became smaller. If the aircraft landed safely, investigators would examine it. If investigators examined it, they would find the electrical components. If they found the components, they would find the maintenance records. And if they found the records, they might discover why Maya Reed had been forced out 3 years earlier. Nora returned to the cabin after bringing Maya's bag forward. She moved from row to row with a steadiness that kept the passengers from seeing how serious the situation had become. A young mother held her daughter close. An elderly man kept his eyes shut and whispered words only he could hear. A boy with a small toy airplane no longer asked his mother whether they would be all right. He simply gripped the toy in both hands and stared at the darkness beyond the window. Near the front of the cabin, one passenger stood despite the seatbelt sign and demanded answers. He wanted to know why the captain was not speaking. He wanted to know why a woman with a controversial past had been allowed into the cockpit. He spoke loudly because fear often tries to disguise itself as anger. Nora did not give him the story he wanted. She told him that the crew was handling an emergency and that everyone on board needed to remain seated. When he continued to protest, the aircraft dropped hard through a pocket of turbulence. His balance disappeared before his argument did. He grabbed the top of a seat and realized in one sudden and humiliating instant that there were no important passengers on that airplane. There were only people who needed the crew to bring them home. He sat down. In the cockpit, Maya opened the old metal case from her bag. Inside were the notes her father had kept for years. Some were stained from workshops and rain. Some were folded at the corners. Some carried diagrams that only someone trained to recognize patterns would understand. Daniel Reed had never expected those pages to become evidence. He had written them because he believed that knowledge had a duty. If something dangerous was happening, someone had to leave a record of it. Maya found the page she was looking for. It described a family of electrical units that could behave unpredictably under extreme moisture and fluctuating demand. The failures could begin quietly. A display could reset. A warning could blink and disappear. A circuit could recover just long enough for someone to decide there was no real problem. But under pressure, the instability could spread. Maya looked from the notebook to the failing display. The patterns matched. It was not proof of every detail. Not yet. But it was enough to understand the immediate danger. The aircraft still had reliable primary data. The engines were stable. The flight controls were responding. But the electronic systems could no longer be trusted completely. And the longer they stayed inside the storm, the more dangerous that uncertainty became. She explained what she believed to Evan without overwhelming him. The goal was not to solve 3 years of corruption in the middle of a storm. The goal was to land the airplane before the next failure took away something they could not afford to lose. Evan listened. Then he did something Maya would remember long after the flight was over. He stopped trying to prove that he was in control. Instead, he accepted help. That was the difference between arrogance and courage. Arrogance demanded that a person face danger alone, so no one could see them afraid. Courage understood that survival sometimes required trusting the person beside you. The descent toward Graybridge Field began. The aircraft entered lower cloud, where the rain felt heavier and the turbulence sharper. Every few seconds, lightning exposed the wings before returning them to darkness. The runway lights appeared once through the weather, then vanished again. The cockpit was no longer full of alarms, but the silence between the warnings felt worse. Air traffic control reported worsening wind conditions. Rainwater had begun pooling along parts of the runway. Several aircraft had already diverted. Emergency vehicles were waiting near the landing area, their lights reflecting through the storm like distant signals from another world. Maya studied the approach information. The conditions were difficult, but not impossible. That distinction mattered. They did not have a normal landing ahead of them. They had an exhausted first officer, a captain who could not help, unreliable displays, a severe crosswind, and a system defect that seemed to be spreading through the aircraft in slow, deliberate waves. But they also had a runway. They had engines. They had enough instruments. And they had time if they did not waste it. Maya told Evan they would need to prepare for a manual approach. The automated systems had done enough to bring them close, but the final moments would depend on human judgment. Evan hesitated, not because he did not understand, but because he understood exactly how much was being asked of him. Maya did not tell him to be fearless. She reminded him that fear was not the enemy. Losing focus was. He had the aircraft beneath his hands. He had the runway ahead. He had the training he had spent years earning. And he had someone beside him who knew what it felt like to carry a room full of strangers through the worst moment of their lives. Evan nodded. The clouds thinned for a few seconds. Below them, Graybridge Field appeared. The runway lights glowed through the rain, narrow and distant, surrounded by darkness. For one brief moment, everyone in the cockpit could see where they needed to go. Then a powerful gust hit the aircraft from the side. The plane rolled sharply. A warning tone sounded. The remaining navigation display flickered again. Evan's breath caught. The runway vanished behind rain. And somewhere in the cabin, 186 people realized that the most dangerous part of the flight had only just begun. For a few seconds, there was no runway. There was only rain. There was only wind. There was only the violent sound of an aircraft being pushed sideways through the dark by forces no human being could control. Evan tightened his grip on the controls, but Maya could see the moment when fear tried to take over again. It was there in the way his eyes moved too quickly from one instrument to another. It was there in the breath he did not finish. It was there in the silence that came just before someone either found their training or lost it. Maya stayed with him. She did not take the airplane from his hands. She did not try to become the hero of the story by doing everything herself. Evan was the pilot flying, and the only way they would survive was if he remained connected to the aircraft instead of surrendering to panic. So Maya gave him one instruction at a time. She kept his attention on the remaining instruments. She helped him trust the physical feel of the aircraft when the screens could not be trusted. She reminded him that a crosswind did not need to be defeated. It needed to be understood. The plane would move. The storm would push. Their job was not to force the sky into obedience. Their job was to make the next correct decision before the next dangerous second arrived. Behind them, Nora kept the cabin from falling apart. The passengers could feel the descent. They could feel the aircraft being thrown from side to side. They heard the engines change as Evan adjusted power. They heard the storm strike the fuselage like heavy stones. Some people cried. Some people held the hands of strangers. Some stared at the seatbacks in front of them because looking out the window felt impossible. Nora moved through that fear with the quiet strength of someone who understood that people did not always need answers. Sometimes they needed a face that told them they had not been abandoned. She checked seatbelts. She helped a frightened child hold on to a parent's hand. She guided an elderly passenger through slow breaths. And when panic rose near the front of the cabin, she did not allow it to become a fire that spread through the rows. Even Graham Voss had gone quiet. The man who had tried to stop Maya from reaching the cockpit could no longer pretend that he was protecting anyone. Every new movement of the aircraft reminded him that the woman he had tried to destroy was now helping save his life. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that the truth was not dangerous because it embarrassed him. The truth was dangerous because it had consequences. The runway lights appeared again. This time, they did not vanish immediately. They were still distant, still blurred by rain, still narrow enough to make the approach feel unforgiving. But they were there. Evan saw them. Maya saw them. And in that moment, the cockpit changed. Not because the danger had passed, but because uncertainty had become a direction. The aircraft continued downward. Wind struck again, harder than before. The nose shifted. The wings dipped. The wet runway moved across the windshield, then disappeared at the edge of Maya's vision. Evan corrected too sharply at first, then steadied himself when Maya reminded him to make smaller movements. The storm wanted panic. It wanted a desperate reaction. But Maya had learned long ago that the most dangerous mistakes were usually born from trying to fix everything too fast. The plane crossed the threshold. For one endless second, it seemed as though the runway would remain just out of reach. Then the wheels touched down. The landing was hard. The aircraft hit the wet pavement with enough force to throw the cabin forward against its seatbelts. Water erupted from beneath the tires. Reverse thrust filled the night with a roar. The runway lights streaked past the windows as Evan held the aircraft straight through the wind. No one cheered immediately. The people in the cabin were too afraid to trust what they had felt. They waited. They waited for the engines to quiet. They waited for the violent shaking to stop. They waited for the aircraft to slow enough for their bodies to believe what their minds could not yet accept. Then Flight 718 came to a stop. For several seconds, there was only rain tapping against the fuselage and the broken sound of people trying to breathe again. Then someone began to cry. Someone else began to clap. The applause spread slowly. Not as celebration at first, but as release. People held one another. Parents pressed their faces into their children's hair. Strangers, who had never spoken before, reached across the aisle and touched each other's hands. They had gone into the storm as passengers, but they came through it as witnesses to the same impossible night. In the cockpit, Evan leaned back from the controls with the stunned expression of a man who had just discovered how close he had come to losing everything. He had not flown perfectly. No one could have in those conditions. But he had stayed present. He had listened. He had learned that courage was not a performance. It was a decision made over and over again when every part of you wanted to give up. Maya sat beside him, exhausted, but still. She did not raise her arms. She did not ask for recognition. She looked through the rain-streaked windshield toward the emergency lights waiting on the runway. And for the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to feel something she had tried not to need. She felt seen, not by executives, not by reporters, not by the company that had taken everything from her. She felt seen by the truth itself. Captain Luis Herrera was taken from the cockpit after the aircraft had stopped and received urgent medical care. He survived. The medical crisis had been serious, but it was not the end of his story. Later, after he learned what had happened, he would understand that the people he had trusted behind him had carried his passengers through the one moment when he could not. But the night was not over. The moment the wheels touched the ground, Flight 718 stopped being only an emergency landing. It became evidence. Investigators entered the cockpit before the storm had fully moved away from Graybridge Field. They secured the flight data. They documented the electrical warnings. They examined the maintenance history. They took custody of the component information. And when Maya placed her father's metal case on the table in the airport interview room, the old notes that had once seemed like the private worry of an ignored technician became part of a much larger question. Why had the aircraft failed the way it had? Why did its maintenance records contain gaps? Why had Maya Reed been removed from Aurora Skies after raising similar concerns 3 years earlier? And why had Graham Voss seemed so terrified the moment he learned she was in the cockpit? Voss tried to regain control the way he always had. He made calls. He asked for lawyers. He attempted to frame the situation as an unfortunate combination of weather, a medical emergency, and an employee with a personal grievance against the airline. He wanted investigators to see Maya as a former captain who had returned to the cockpit carrying old resentment. But that story collapsed as soon as the evidence began to speak. The flight data recorder showed the sequence of electrical failures. The maintenance records revealed repeated component changes that did not match the parts supposedly installed. The missing number Maya had noticed years earlier turned out not to be a harmless clerical error. It had broken the chain of identification for a series of units that should never have returned to active aircraft service. Components had been listed as new when they had been rebuilt, relabeled, and moved through a supplier called Horizon Avionics Solutions. At first, Horizon appeared to be only another vendor in a complicated aviation supply chain. Then investigators followed the money. They found payments routed through companies that existed mostly on paper. They found contracts approved through layers of signatures, designed to make responsibility difficult to trace. They found maintenance supervisors who had been pressured to sign forms they did not fully understand. They found workers who had been told that raising questions would cost them their jobs. And eventually, they found the financial links that connected Horizon Avionics Solutions to a network of shell companies controlled by people loyal to Graham Voss. The same man who had called Maya unstable had profited from the weakness she had tried to expose. The same man who had treated safety reports as obstacles had built a system that rewarded silence. The same man who had tried to stop Maya from reaching the cockpit had known exactly why she could not be allowed to speak. Once the truth began moving, it moved faster than Voss could contain. Former mechanics came forward. Record specialists came forward. A retired quality control manager produced copies of internal emails that had been saved in private because he had never trusted the company to keep them. A supervisor admitted that some replacement units had been approved under pressure, even when the documentation was incomplete. Another employee revealed that Maya's report had not been dismissed because it lacked evidence. It had been dismissed because it had too much. And every new witness made the old story harder to believe. Maya was called to testify before an aviation oversight panel weeks later. She arrived wearing no captain's uniform. She did not need one. The uniform had never been the source of her authority. Her authority came from the fact that she had seen danger, spoken about it, and refused to become silent when silence was easier. She did not turn the hearing into revenge. She did not raise her voice. She explained what she had found 3 years earlier. She explained why the missing number mattered. She explained how maintenance records were supposed to protect passengers, not protect executives. She explained that safety was not a slogan painted on a corporate wall. It was a series of decisions made by ordinary people who either chose to tell the truth or chose to look away. Then she opened her father's metal case. Inside were the notes Daniel Reed had written before anyone believed they would matter. He had spent his life trying to make aircraft safer. He had never asked for a title. He had never asked to be remembered. He had only believed that someone had to leave a record when something did not feel right. For years, that record had been ignored. Now it sat before the people who had the power to act. Graham Voss watched from across the hearing room as the story he had spent years controlling came apart piece by piece. The reports he had buried returned as evidence. The maintenance signatures he had trusted became questions. The missing number he had believed no one would notice became the thread that pulled the entire deception apart. His downfall was not dramatic because he shouted or confessed in front of cameras. It was dramatic because he had built his power on the belief that no one would ever make him answer for what he had done. And now, one by one, people were asking. The board removed him from his position. Federal investigators opened criminal cases connected to fraud, falsified maintenance records, and the financial network behind Horizon Avionics Solutions. Months later, Graham Voss was taken into custody, while the same news cameras he had once tried to manage waited outside. There was a certain justice in the way it happened. Voss had spent years using paperwork to hide danger. In the end, paperwork exposed him. He had silenced people by making them feel small. In the end, the people he had ignored became the witnesses who brought him down. He had treated Maya Reed's name like a problem to be erased. In the end, her name became impossible to separate from the truth. Aurora Skies offered Maya an apology. It came with compensation, public statements, and an invitation to return. They offered her a senior position. They offered to restore the career they had helped destroy. They spoke about rebuilding trust and creating a safer culture. For many people, that offer would have seemed like victory. But Maya understood something they did not. Some doors were not meant to be reopened. She accepted the apology because acknowledgement mattered. She accepted the compensation because justice did not require her to pretend that harm had never been done. But she did not return to Aurora Skies. Instead, Maya used part of what she received to build something that did not depend on anyone powerful deciding who deserved to be heard. She created the Daniel Reed Aviation Fellowship. It began in a modest simulator training center near a small airport, where young people from neighborhoods that had never seen aviation as an option could learn about aircraft systems, emergency procedures, maintenance ethics, and the responsibility that came with stepping into a cockpit. Maya did not teach them that pilots were heroes. She taught them that pilots were human. She taught them that fear was normal, but silence could be dangerous. She taught them that a checklist was not just a list of tasks. It was a promise to everyone who trusted you with their life. She taught them that when something felt wrong, they had the right to ask questions. And perhaps most importantly, she taught them that no title, no paycheck, and no powerful person was worth more than the truth. Evan Cole visited the center months after Flight 718. The storm had changed him too. He had returned to flying after additional training, but he no longer confused confidence with control. He understood that asking for help had not made him weak. It had helped save 186 people. Nora Bell came too. She stood quietly near the simulator room and watched Maya guide a nervous student through an emergency procedure. Nora had seen Maya at her lowest point, standing in a cabin aisle while a powerful man tried to stop her from doing the right thing. Now she saw what had come from that moment. Not revenge, not bitterness, purpose. Captain Luis Herrera eventually recovered and wrote Maya a letter. He did not write it as an airline captain to a former captain. He wrote it as one human being to another. He thanked her for protecting the passengers he had been unable to protect himself. He thanked her for believing in Evan when Evan had begun to doubt himself. And he thanked her for proving that a person's worth could not be decided by the people who had once tried to take everything from them. Years later, passengers still remembered Flight 718. Some remembered the storm. Some remembered the hard landing. Some remembered the woman in the ordinary coat who stood up from seat 34B when everyone else was too frightened to move. But Maya remembered something else. She remembered her father's old notes. She remembered the missing number. She remembered the years when people told her that speaking up would only make things worse. And she remembered the truth that finally carried her through the storm. The sky had never judged her by her past. It had never cared whether she wore a captain's uniform, whether an executive approved of her, or whether a company tried to erase her name. The sky only asked one thing. When people trusted her with their lives, would she respect the truth? Maya Reed did. And because she did, 186 people came home. Because she did, a man who believed he was untouchable finally had to answer for what he had done. And because she did, a new generation of future pilots, mechanics, and engineers learned that courage was not always loud. Sometimes courage was a missing number in a maintenance record. Sometimes it was an old notebook nobody wanted to read. Sometimes it was a woman standing up in seat 34B, even when the most powerful man on the plane wanted her to sit back down. The truth may take time. It may be ignored. It may be buried beneath fear, money, and silence. But when the storm comes, the truth is often the only thing strong enough to guide people home. If this story reminds you that doing the right thing matters, even when no one stands beside you, hold on to that lesson. Because the world does not become safer when brave people stay quiet. It becomes safer when they speak.
I kept this house standing for 20 years because I believe my boys mind their way back.
She had nothing left to fight with.
There is nothing left to sell, no one left to call, and no way left to fight them.
Then 3 black cars stopped outside her gate.
She spent 20 years losing everything because of our family's lies. No one takes her home today.
3 men walked toward the house. She
Our
never
grandfather
left.
took us away from her when we were children, then made us believe she had forgotten us. We came back because she deserves the truth. This was in my hand when I was 8 years old. She carried me through floodwater because I could not breathe, and she never let go of me.
Celeste recognized it before she recognized
I
him.
know that flashlight. But that little boy was only 8 years old. Who are you?
They were not sent by the bank.
The bank did not send us. I am Owen, and we found every letter you wrote after they took us away from you.
They brought 73 hidden letters.
There were 73 letters hidden in our grandfather's private study. Birthday cards, Christmas you sent us was kept from us.
Every letter proved she never stopped loving them.
I wrote to all 3 of you, every birthmas, every time it stormed.
The brothers had believed she abandoned them.
We were children, and they told us you had moved on without us. For 20 years, I thought you had let us go because we were too difficult to love.
But their grandfather
never left us.
had stolen the truth.
He lied to us because he thought money could replace the woman who made us feel safe for the first time. We found every letter you ever sent us hidden in our grandfather's private study. For 20 years, he made us believe you abandoned us, and he made you believe we forgot you.
To understand why those letters mattered so much, it was necessary to go back to the winter of 2004, when Celeste Morgan was 46 years old and had almost convinced herself that God had forgotten the prayer she had whispered for half her life. Celeste lived in a small, weathered house near the edge of Pine Hollow, Tennessee, where the road narrowed into old trees and rusted mailboxes. The house had belonged to her Aunt Evelyn, a woman who believed that every home should keep a light burning near the front door in case someone needed help after dark. Evelyn had been gone for years, but Celeste kept the habit. No matter how tired she was, no matter how high the electric bill became, the porch light always came on at sunset. Celeste worked before sunrise in the laundry department at Pine Hollow Memorial Hospital. Most people never saw her there. They only saw clean sheets folded in perfect stacks, fresh towels delivered to rooms, and uniforms pressed before the next shift began. At night, she cleaned the county archive building, where old records slept beneath dust and locked glass cabinets. Her days were long, her income was small, and her hands were always dry from soap and bleach. Still, Celeste gave what she could. She brought extra food to the church pantry. She volunteered twice a month at a weekend program for children waiting to be placed in foster homes. She kept a box of winter coats in her hallway closet. Most of them donated. Some bought one at a time from thrift stores after payday. The children who came through the program knew her as the woman who remembered their favorite snacks, who never forced them to speak before they were ready, and who understood that a child could be loud, rude, withdrawn, or angry without being bad. Years earlier, Celeste had lost 2 pregnancies. The second loss had nearly taken her life. After that, doctors told her that another pregnancy would be too dangerous. She had spent months grieving a future that no longer seemed possible, then years learning to live with the empty space it left behind. But she never stopped wanting to be a mother. She simply stopped saying it out loud. One rainy evening in November, after 2 exhausting shifts and a bus ride home, Celeste unlocked her front door and found a message blinking on her answering machine. It was from Cassandra Reed, a social worker who had known Celeste through the weekend foster program. Cassandra had a problem that could not wait until morning. 3 brothers had lost both parents in a highway accident several weeks earlier. Their father, Daniel Vale, had been driving home with his wife after visiting family in another county when a delivery truck crossed the center line during a storm. Daniel and his wife died at the scene. Their son survived because they were asleep in the back seat. The oldest boy was 14-year-old Owen. The middle brother, Mateo, was 11. The youngest, Silas, was 8. In the weeks after the funeral, the boys had been moved from emergency placement to emergency placement. One family agreed to take Owen, but not the younger 2. Another said Mateo was too angry. A third said Silas's silence made them uncomfortable. The brothers had already begun to understand a terrible truth. People were willing to help them only if helping did not cost too much. The state was preparing to separate them. Cassandra knew Celeste's home was small. She knew Celeste did not have much money. She also knew Celeste had completed emergency caregiver training, passed the required background checks, and had been waiting for a placement that needed someone willing to care for children who had already learned not to trust promises. Celeste called Cassandra back before taking off her coat. By midnight, she had cleared the guest room, spread blankets across the old sofa, and pulled every extra pillow from the linen closet. She cooked a pot of chicken soup, though she had no idea whether any of the boys would eat it. Then she turned on the porch light and waited. The boys arrived after 1 in the morning. Owen entered first. He was tall for his age, thin in the way children become thin when stress replaces appetite, and he carried a backpack that looked too small to contain a life. Mateo followed with his hands clenched inside the sleeves of an oversized hoodie. Silas came last, holding a plastic grocery bag filled with folded paper stars. Celeste noticed immediately that none of them looked around the house with curiosity. They looked around it like prisoners measuring a cell. They had learned not to get comfortable. Celeste did not ask them to call her anything. She did not tell them everything would be fine. She did not ask them to smile for the social worker or say thank you for the soup. She simply told them there was food in the kitchen, clean blankets in the bedrooms, and enough room for all 3 of them to stay together. That first night, Owen slept in his clothes with his backpack under his arm. Mateo refused to eat until nearly 3 in the morning, when he thought nobody was watching. Silas sat by the window, folding and unfolding the same paper star until the corners tore. Celeste did not force him to stop. The first weeks were difficult in ways that no foster training manual could fully explain. Owen hid food under his bed: bread, crackers, fruit cups, even half a sandwich wrapped in a napkin. At first, Celeste found it and almost scolded him. Then she remembered something she had heard from another foster parent years earlier. Children who have been moved too often do not hoard food because they are greedy. They hoard it because they do not believe breakfast is guaranteed. So Celeste placed a small basket in the pantry and told the boys it belonged to them. It was always stocked with crackers, fruit, cereal bars, and anything else she could afford. Nobody had to ask permission to take from it. Nobody had to hide it. Owen did not trust the basket at first. But after several weeks, the food under his bed began to disappear. Mateo struggled differently. He carried his grief like a match held too close to gasoline. A wrong look at school could set him off. A careless joke about his parents could make him swing before he had time to think. He had been suspended twice before Christmas, and once after, not because he enjoyed hurting people, but because anger was the only feeling he knew how to express without falling apart. Celeste did not excuse what he did, but she refused to define him by it. She introduced him to George Bell, a retired firefighter who ran a small woodworking program for boys at the community center. George had lost a son in the military years earlier and understood the language of grief that came out through broken things. At the workshop, Mateo learned to sand rough edges until they became smooth. He learned to measure twice before cutting once. He learned that strength could be useful without being dangerous. The first thing he made was a crooked wooden shelf for Celeste's kitchen. She hung it anyway. Silas remained quiet. For almost 2 months, he spoke only with his eyes, his hands, and the paper stars he folded from scraps of newspaper, old schoolwork sheets, and grocery lists. He lined them on the windowsill of his room, then moved them to the dining table, then placed one beside Celeste's coffee mug each morning. She never asked what they meant. She only kept them safe. Celeste had 4 rules in her home. The first was that whenever possible, everyone ate together. The second was that nobody would be punished for telling the truth. The third was that anger could be taken outside, written down, cried out, or worked through, but it could not be used to wound someone else. The fourth rule was the most important. The porch light stayed on until everyone was home. At first, the boys thought the rule was strange. Then they began to understand it. The porch light was not only for strangers, it was for Owen when he came home late from helping George fix a broken fence. It was for Mateo after detention. It was for Silas when he woke from nightmares and needed to stand on the porch steps, looking at something warm against the darkness. It was Celeste's way of telling them that no matter how difficult the day had been, there was still a place waiting for them. For a while, Pine Hollow watched from a distance. Some people were kind. The women at the church brought casseroles. George gave Mateo spare tools. A teacher at Silas's school quietly donated books with large pictures because she had noticed he liked to trace the drawings with his fingers. The woman at the grocery store began saving bruised apples for Celeste at a discount. But not everyone approved. Mabel Crew, who ran the weekly Pine Hollow Bulletin, had spent most of her life collecting other people's mistakes and turning them into public entertainment. She was the kind of woman who claimed she only cared about the community, while making sure every rumor reached the community before the truth did. Mabel began with questions that sounded harmless. She wondered aloud how a woman with 2 jobs could properly care for 3 boys. She asked why the county would place children in an old house with a leaking roof. She hinted that Celeste might be accepting foster payments for reasons that had nothing to do with love. The rumors spread because rumors always spread faster in places where people know each other's business, but rarely know each other's pain. Celeste heard them. She heard the whispers in grocery store aisles. She saw the looks when she walked into church with the boys. She noticed people growing quiet when she approached, but she did not fight every lie. She was too busy building a home. By spring, Owen had started helping her repair the back fence. He had a talent for fixing things without making a fuss about it. He could look at a loose hinge, a broken drawer, or a warped board, and somehow understand what it needed. Celeste began saving small amounts from every paycheck to buy materials. Owen gave up asking why she was spending money on a house that was barely standing and began helping her make it stronger. Mateo's grades improved, not because he suddenly became interested in school, but because George taught him how to take pride in learning something difficult. He started staying after class to work on math with a teacher who had once been afraid of him. He still had a temper, but now he knew anger did not have to decide who he became. Silas spoke for the first time on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Celeste had fallen asleep in the chair after cleaning the archive building overnight. The boys were in the kitchen, making grilled cheese sandwiches with more butter than necessary. Silas stood near the counter, watching smoke rise from a pan that had been left too long on the stove. Then he said one word. He said Celeste's name. Owen dropped the spatula. Mateo froze. Celeste woke so fast that she nearly knocked over her coffee. Silas looked embarrassed, as if he had broken something by speaking. But Celeste did not rush him. She simply smiled and told him she had heard him. That was enough. The real turning point came during the flood. In late January of 2006, Pine Hollow was hit by 3 days of relentless rain. The river rose. Roads vanished under brown water. Power lines fell across backyards. The town had seen storms before, but not like this. By the 3rd night, the electricity in Celeste's house went out. The boys gathered in the living room under blankets, while rain hammered the roof. Water crept beneath the back door. The porch light flickered, dimmed, then went dark for the first time in years. Silas had always been afraid of storms after the accident that killed his parents. But that night, his fear became something worse. His breathing tightened. His chest began to rise and fall too fast. The inhaler he had been prescribed was nearly empty, and the nearest hospital was across several flooded roads. Celeste tried the phone. There was no signal. She tried her car. The engine turned once, then died. The volunteer fire station was less than a mile away, but between the house and the station was a stretch of road already covered in water. Mateo wanted to go. Owen wanted to carry Silas. Celeste knew none of them could manage it alone. So she wrapped Silas in blankets, gave Owen an old flashlight, and told Mateo to stay close behind them. Then she stepped out into the storm. The water was freezing. The wind cut through their clothes. At one point, Celeste slipped near a ditch hidden beneath the floodwater and nearly lost her footing. Owen grabbed her arm before she fell. Mateo held Silas tight against his chest, even though fear had made him shake from head to toe. They reached the fire station just before Silas's breathing became dangerously shallow. The volunteers got him to the hospital in a rescue truck. Doctors later said that the timing had mattered. Celeste spent the rest of the night sitting in a plastic chair beside Silas's hospital bed. Her shoes were still wet. Her hands were raw from cold. She had not slept in more than 20 hours. When Silas woke, he looked at her for a long time. Then he gave her a name that did not appear on any government document. He called her Mama Celeste. Not loudly, not perfectly, but clearly enough for Owen and Mateo to hear. Neither of the older boys said anything. They did not need to. From that day forward, the house on the edge of Pine Hollow was no longer a temporary placement. It was home. Owen carved a small wooden sign and hung it near the porch. It read, "The Morgan Home." Mateo built a narrow bench beneath the front window. Silas placed paper stars along the ledge, one for every night the porch light had stayed on. For the first time since their parents died, the boys began planning for the future. Owen talked about becoming a contractor. Mateo wanted to build furniture. Silas had started making little drawings of houses with yellow lights in the windows. Celeste began the paperwork to move from emergency placement to long-term guardianship. And then Alistair Vale arrived. He came in a black car with a driver, 2 attorneys, and the kind of quiet confidence that made people step aside before he asked them to. Alistair was the father of Daniel Vale, the boy's late father. He was also the founder of Vale Holdings, a regional construction company that had grown into a national corporation. For years, Alistair and Daniel had been estranged. Daniel had walked away from the family business after Alistair refused to accept the life he wanted. He had married a woman Alistair considered beneath the expectations of the Vale name. He had moved away, worked ordinary jobs, raised his sons without asking his father for money, and kept the boys far from a world built on appearances. When Daniel and his wife died, Alistair had been notified through legal channels, but at the time, he had chosen not to act. The boys were grieving. The situation was complicated, and Alistair did not want public attention around a family conflict he had spent years pretending did not exist. Then an insurance settlement connected to the accident began moving through probate court. The existence of 3 minor heirs became impossible for him to ignore. Suddenly, Alistair discovered the importance of family. He told the court that he could offer the boys stability, education, medical care, private tutors, and a financial future Celeste could never provide. His attorneys pointed to the house's old wiring, the repairs Celeste could not yet afford, and the fact that her emergency caregiver status had not been converted into permanent guardianship. They did not accuse Celeste of cruelty. They did something more devastating. They made love sound insufficient. Cassandra testified that the boys were attached to Celeste and that separating them from her could cause lasting harm. George spoke about Mateo's progress. Teachers described Owen's new confidence and Silas's return to speech. But under state rules, biological kinship carried weight, and Alistair's attorneys knew how to turn every weakness in Celeste's life into evidence that she could not compete. The judge did not say Celeste had failed. The judge said the boys would be placed with their grandfather for their future. To Celeste, the difference meant nothing. The day they left was colder than the night of the flood. Owen stood on the porch for a long time, staring at the sign he had made. Mateo kept wiping his face with the sleeve of his jacket, angry at himself for crying. Silas held the battered flashlight from the flood night against his chest. Celeste packed what the boys were allowed to bring. Most of it was not much: clothes, school books, a few photographs, Mateo's first woodworking project, some paper stars. Before leaving, Owen slipped a folded piece of paper into the kitchen drawer. Celeste did not find it until later that night. It was a map of the house, drawn in pencil. The front porch was marked with a small yellow circle. Underneath it, Owen had written that they would remember where the light was. For a while, Celeste believed that promise would be enough. It was not. Alistair moved the boys into his estate outside Nashville. He told everyone that he was giving them a better life. But better, in his world, meant controlled. Owen was sent to a private academy that taught him how to speak in rooms full of powerful men. Mateo was placed in a strict boarding school after several angry outbursts. Silas was enrolled in a program designed to make him more polished, more composed, and less emotional. They were not physically abandoned, but they were emotionally managed. Whenever the boys asked about Celeste, Alistair gave them versions of the same story. He suggested that she had moved on. He implied that she had accepted the money the state had provided and chosen not to remain involved. He told them letters had not come because there was nothing to receive. At the same time, Celeste wrote. She wrote on birthdays. She wrote at Christmas. She wrote whenever she heard that a storm had passed through Nashville and wondered whether Silas still feared thunder. She wrote to Owen about home repairs. She wrote to Mateo about the old workshop tools George had left for him. She wrote to all three boys about the porch light. The letters never arrived. Mabel Crew made things worse in Pine Hollow. After the court ruling, she wrote a carefully worded article suggesting Celeste had lost the boys because the county had concerns about her care. She never directly accused Celeste of abuse. She did not need to. She used phrases like troubling circumstances and questions about stability. In a small town, vague words could destroy a reputation more effectively than a direct lie. Celeste lost her evening cleaning job at the archive after a board member complained that the county should avoid controversy. Some parents stopped letting their children attend the weekend foster program if Celeste was there. The church pantry, where she had volunteered for years, quietly asked her to take a break. The woman who had opened her home to 3 grieving boys became someone people crossed the street to avoid. Still, every night, she turned on the porch light. Years passed. The roof was repaired one patch at a time. The garden behind the house grew wild, then was cut back, then grew again. The boys became men. Owen learned the business Alistair wanted him to learn, but he never became blind to what power could do. Mateo became a skilled furniture maker. and later founded a company that hired young people leaving foster care. Silas, who had once folded paper stars in silence, became a documentary editor. He built stories from old footage, forgotten letters, and details other people missed. They stayed close to one another because they had learned early that brothers were not simply relatives. They were witnesses. As adults, they began asking harder questions about their childhood. Owen remembered the basket of food in Celeste's pantry. Mateo remembered the shelf he had built. Silas remembered the warm circle of porch light reflected in floodwater. None of those memories matched the version of Celeste that Alistair had described. When Alistair died, the brothers inherited more money than they had ever wanted, and more answers than they were prepared to face. Among the documents in his private study was a locked cabinet. The key was found in a sealed envelope addressed to the estate executor. Inside were the letters, dozens of them, some still unopened. There were also notes from Alistair's staff, records showing that correspondence had been intercepted, calls from Celeste had been blocked, and school administrators had been instructed not to share the boys' contact information with her. For 20 years, Alistair had allowed his grandsons to believe the woman who saved them had stopped caring. For 20 years, he had allowed Celeste to believe the boys had forgotten her. The brothers began searching for her immediately. But Pine Hollow had changed. Records were incomplete. Celeste had withdrawn from almost every public part of her life. Her house was still listed under an old family trust in Evelyn Morgan's name. Mabel's old articles falsely suggested Celeste had left town years earlier. Every lead seemed to end in another dead file, another wrong address, another person who remembered her only through rumor. Then, nearly 4 years later, Silas found a hospital billing record connected to an old charity program. It led them back to Pine Hollow. It led them to a foreclosure notice. And it led them to a woman sitting alone in a dark house with one suitcase by the door, believing that the last thing she had left was about to be taken from her too. Celeste did not recognize them at first. 20 years can change a child's face so completely that memory has to search for smaller things. A way of standing. A habit of looking away when overwhelmed. A hand that turns a ring around a finger whenever anger is trying to rise. She saw Owen first in the oldest man's posture. He still carried his shoulders slightly forward, as if he were ready to shield someone smaller behind him. She saw Mateo in the way the middle brother glanced at the porch bench before looking anywhere else. And she saw Silas when the youngest man raised the battered silver flashlight and held it carefully, not as an object, but as proof that he had carried part of her with him all his life. For a moment, Celeste could not breathe. She had imagined this day so many times that reality felt almost cruel. In some versions, the boys had come back angry. In others, they had come back only long enough to explain why they had stayed away. In the saddest versions, they had never come back at all. Now they were standing in front of her, grown into men she had not been allowed to know. Owen stepped forward first. He did not begin with an excuse. He did not say that time had healed anything. He opened the briefcase and placed the letters on Celeste's kitchen table. Her hands shook when she saw her own handwriting. There were envelopes she remembered licking, closed in the middle of the night. There were stamps she had bought instead of medicine one winter because she had believed a message from a mother mattered more than comfort. There were letters she had written after cancer treatment, when she could barely hold a pen steady. There were birthday cards for boys who had become men before she was allowed to see them again. She picked up one envelope and stared at it for so long that nobody spoke. Then she looked at Owen. The grief in his face told her everything. The boys had not forgotten. They had been kept from her. The reunion did not become easy, simply because the truth had been found. There were too many missing years, too many birthdays, too many first jobs, graduations, illnesses, heartbreaks, and ordinary afternoons that should have belonged to a family, but had been stolen by pride and silence. Celeste did not rush to fill that space with speeches. She made coffee. It was what she had done whenever someone came into her home carrying pain. They sat around the same kitchen table where Owen had once hidden crackers in his pockets, where Mateo had built his crooked shelf, where Silas had left paper stars beside her mug. The wood was more worn now. The chairs did not match. The room still smelled faintly of coffee, old paint, and the lemon cleaner Celeste had used for decades. Owen told her about the letters. Mateo told her about the years they had spent wondering whether she had chosen to let them go. Silas told her that he had kept the flashlight because it was the only thing from their old life that no one had managed to take from him. Celeste listened. She did not blame them. They had been children when they were taken away. Later, they had been young men trying to survive inside a family that treated obedience like gratitude. They had believed what they were told because children often believe the adults who control the doors around them. But the truth did not erase the damage. Celeste had spent 2 decades asking herself whether she had failed them. She had wondered if Owen had become ashamed of her. She had feared Mateo had turned his anger against the world because she wasn't there to help him carry it. She had imagined Silas losing his voice again, alone in some cold room far from the house where he had first begun to speak. For 20 years, she had lived with a wound that had no explanation. Now the explanation was sitting in front of her in a stack of unopened letters. Owen told her they had not come only to apologize. The bank had scheduled the house for auction because Celeste had fallen behind after years of medical bills, property taxes, and repairs. She had never complained publicly. She had sold what she could, delayed treatment when she should not have, and tried to keep the house because it was the last place in the world where she still felt connected to the boys. Owen had already paid the debt, not as a favor that would leave her feeling indebted, not as a grand gesture for cameras. He had arranged for the home to be protected through a legal trust that Celeste controlled herself. The house would remain hers. The land would remain hers. No company, bank, or relative would ever have the power to take it from her again. Mateo had brought plans to repair the roof, reinforce the foundation, rebuild the porch, and restore the garden. But he had made one thing clear from the beginning. Nothing would be changed without Celeste's approval. They were not there to turn her home into a museum of their guilt. They were there to give her back the security she should have had all along. Silas had something different. He had spent years making documentaries about people who had been overlooked by systems larger than themselves. He knew how to find the truth inside old records, erased histories, and stories that powerful people preferred to keep buried. He had spent months gathering proof of what happened in Pine Hollow. He found the court documents showing that Celeste had never been declared abusive or dangerous. He found the licensing records showing that her only obstacles had been financial and structural, not moral. He found letters from Cassandra Reed praising Celeste's care. He found statements from teachers, George Bell, hospital staff, and neighbors who remembered the boy's improvement after moving into Celeste's home. Most of all, he found Mabel Crew's old articles. The stories had been carefully written to avoid legal consequences, but their meaning had been obvious. Mabel had turned uncertainty into suspicion, and suspicion into public judgment. Her words had helped isolate Celeste at the moment she needed community most. Mabel was still in Pine Hollow. She had become older, slower, and more respected than she deserved to be. She sat on the community advisory board. She ran local heritage events. People called her a historian, though much of her work had been built on stories she never bothered to verify. Owen, Mateo, and Silas did not want revenge in the way most people imagined revenge. They did not want to humiliate Mabel for entertainment. They did not want to use their money to make her suffer. They wanted the town to face what it had done. And they wanted to create something that would prevent another family from being treated the same way. A week later, Pine Hollow held a public town meeting at the old municipal hall. The official purpose of the meeting was a redevelopment proposal. A private company had offered to buy several older properties near the edge of town, including homes once owned by low-income families. The plan promised new shops, parking spaces, and increased tax revenue. Many residents supported it because the town had struggled for years. Few people knew that Owen had purchased the development company's controlling interest months earlier. Few people knew that Mateo had spent years working with transitional housing programs for young adults, leaving foster care. Few people knew that Silas had prepared a short documentary built from old records, interviews, photographs, and the letters Alistair had hidden. The hall was full that night. Mabel sat near the front in a navy blue jacket, smiling at people who greeted her. She had no idea that the story she once helped bury was about to return. Celeste almost did not go. She had spent so many years avoiding public spaces that the thought of sitting in a crowded room made her chest tighten. She did not want pity. She did not want strangers looking at her with guilty eyes. She did not want her pain turned into a spectacle. But Silas told her, gently and without pressure, that the decision was hers. Celeste thought about the 3 boys who had once been too afraid to believe they would stay together. She thought about the younger version of herself, standing in a courtroom, while strangers discussed whether love was enough. She thought about every person who had heard a lie about her, and chosen silence, because silence was easier than asking for the truth. So she went. She wore a simple green dress she had owned for years. Owen walked beside her. Mateo carried a folder of documents. Silas held the old flashlight in one hand and a small box of paper stars in the other. The meeting began like every other meeting in Pine Hollow. The mayor spoke about investment. Council members discussed property values. Mabel made notes, as though she had already decided how the story would be told in the next edition of her bulletin. Then Owen stood. He introduced himself not as the head of Vale Holdings, but as a former foster child who had once been told that love could not compete with wealth. He explained that his company would not support the demolition plan. Instead, the Vale brothers were creating the Porch Light Foundation, a fund dedicated to keeping siblings together in foster care, supporting emergency caregivers, helping low-income families meet housing requirements, and giving young people leaving the foster system a safe place to begin again. The fund would provide grants for home repairs, medical support, legal advocacy, school supplies, counseling, and temporary housing. It would also create a local family resource center in Pine Hollow, not in a distant city where people had to drive hours to ask for help. Mateo explained that the old neighborhood would not be demolished. Several homes would be renovated and converted into short-term housing for foster families, grandparents raising grandchildren, and women rebuilding after medical or financial crises. The project would not be named after the Vale family. It would be named after the woman who taught them what home meant. Then Silas stepped forward. The room grew quiet as he placed the old flashlight on the table beside him. He explained that it had belonged to a boy who once believed nobody would come for him. He explained that the woman who carried that boy through floodwater had later been painted as unstable, selfish, and unfit by people who never bothered to learn the truth. The lights dimmed. A screen behind him came alive. For the next 12 minutes, Pine Hollow watched the story it had refused to see. They saw photographs of Celeste's house before the boys arrived. They saw a copy of her emergency caregiver certification. They saw records of Owen's improved school attendance, Mateo's workshop reports, and Silas's first documented words after months of silence. They saw court records showing that Celeste had never been accused of abuse or neglect. They saw excerpts from the letters she had written, each one filled with patience, worry, and love. They saw the false assumptions that had spread through town, repeated so often that many people had mistaken them for fact. And finally, they saw Mabel's own articles. Nobody shouted. Nobody needed to. The silence in the room was heavier than anger. Mabel sat frozen in her chair. For years, she had believed that the harm she caused was small, because she had never put her hands on anyone. She had not taken the boys away. She had not blocked the letters. She had not stood in the courtroom, but she had helped make Celeste alone. She had given people permission to look away. When the film ended, Mabel stood slowly. Her voice shook as she admitted that she had never verified the claims she printed. She had relied on gossip, on assumptions, and on the belief that a poor woman with no powerful family behind her would never have the ability to challenge her. She said that she had told herself she was protecting the community, but the truth was harder. She had enjoyed being the person who decided whose story mattered. Mabel apologized to Celeste in front of the entire town. Celeste did not rush to embrace her. She did not perform forgiveness for the comfort of people who wanted the evening to end neatly. Instead, she told Mabel that an apology was not the same as repair. Truth had to be spoken. Harm had to be acknowledged. Change had to be proven over time. The room listened. For the first time in decades, Celeste was not speaking from a place of shame. She was speaking from dignity. Mabel resigned from the Community Advisory Board the following month. She published a full correction in the Pine Hollow Bulletin, naming the false assumptions and admitting the damage they caused. She donated the profits from her local history books to the Porchlight Foundation. It did not erase the years Celeste lost, but it changed what would happen next. The town began to change in smaller ways too. The church pantry asked Celeste to return, not as a volunteer carrying boxes, but as an advisor for families in crisis. The archive building that once dismissed her offered her access to records for the foundation's work. Teachers who had remained silent when Mabel's rumors spread began supporting a school program for children in temporary housing. George Bell, now old and walking with a cane, came to the Morgan house one afternoon, carrying Mateo's first wooden shelf. He had kept it safe after Celeste lost storage space during treatment. Mateo hung it back in the kitchen himself. Owen repaired the back fence. Mateo rebuilt the porch bench. Silas framed several of the paper stars and placed them along the hallway wall. The house changed, but it did not become unfamiliar. The cracked boards were replaced. The roof no longer leaked. The heating system worked. The garden came back to life. But Celeste insisted that the old porch light remain exactly where it had always been. It was cleaned, repaired, and fitted with a new bulb. But it was still the same light. The first Thanksgiving after the brothers returned, the kitchen was too crowded. Mateo burned the rolls because he was trying to cook and argue with Owen at the same time. Owen complained about the table being too small, even though he had built an extension for it himself. Silas sat quietly for a while, watching them with the soft expression of someone who had waited too long to see a room full of people feel safe. Celeste looked around the table and understood something she had not been able to understand before. She had not failed. She had never failed them. What had happened was not proof that love had been too weak. It was proof that power could be cruel when it valued ownership over care. But even after 20 years of silence, the boys had remembered the truth of what she gave them. Not every detail, not every day, but the feeling. They remembered being wanted. They remembered being safe. They remembered the light. Months later, on another rainy evening, Celeste was sitting on the porch when Cassandra Reed's daughter came up the walkway. Cassandra herself had retired years earlier, but her daughter had followed her into social work. She was not there to ask Celeste to take in another child. Celeste was older now. She had earned the right to rest. Nobody expected her to begin again from nothing. But the young social worker had brought a 12-year-old girl named Ava, who had been moved 3 times in 6 months and was waiting for a temporary place to stay while a kinship arrangement was being reviewed. Ava stood under the porch roof with a duffel bag pressed tightly against her side. She looked at the house the way Owen, Mateo, and Silas had once looked at it. Not with hope. Not yet. With caution. Celeste did not make promises she could not keep. She simply invited Ava inside for a meal. Owen set another chair at the table. Mateo pulled a dry blanket from the closet. Silas showed Ava the paper stars in the hallway and explained, without using too many words, that they had been made by someone who once did not know how to speak. Outside, rain tapped against the porch roof. Inside, the house grew warm. And before the night was over, Celeste walked to the front door and turned on the light. Because family is not only blood. It is not money, property, a last name, or a promise written into a legal document. Family is the person who keeps a place for you when the world has convinced you that you do not belong anywhere. Family is the hand that reaches for you in floodwater. Family is the home that waits without asking whether you deserve to return. And sometimes, after years of darkness, all it takes to find your way back is one porch light that never went out. After a long day of airports and travel, Marcus wanted only one quiet room where his exhausted little daughter could finally rest.
Dad, are we finally home for tonight?
Before Marcus had even finished speaking, Derek looked at his clothes and decided that he did not belong there.
I'm sorry, sir. We have no rooms available.
Marcus did not argue. He simply watched Derek's polite expression turn cold when he realized Marcus looked like an ordinary traveler.
Could you please check once more? My daughter is exhausted.
Only moments later, a wealthy-looking couple arrived.
Welcome. We have a beautiful room ready for you.
And suddenly, Derek had a room ready without hesitation. That small movement told Marcus everything. There had been rooms all along. The lie had been about appearance.
So the rooms were never the problem.
Maya could see the truth on the reservation screen. Rooms were open, but fear kept her silent.
There are rooms, I know there are.
Marcus knew children could feel humiliation long before they understood the word for it.
Their choices say nothing about who we are.
Marcus did not raise his voice. He asked only to speak with the manager and have the system checked honestly.
Then let me speak with your manager.
Derek brought Richard from the back office, and Richard arrived already convinced that Marcus was the problem.
I'm told you are causing a disturbance.
Richard did not ask what happened or check the system. He looked at Marcus and decided he did not belong.
This hotel maintains standards, sir. Escort them outside before this becomes more serious.
Richard called security and ordered Marcus and Zoe removed, turning a simple request for honesty into public humiliation. For several seconds, he said nothing. He stood beneath the soft gold lights of the lobby, while Zoe leaned against him, her small body heavy with exhaustion. The polished marble floor reflected the chandelier overhead. Somewhere near the lounge, a pianist played a slow, elegant melody. Guests drifted through the lobby with designer luggage, expensive watches, and the relaxed confidence of people who had never needed to wonder whether a door would be opened for them. And in the middle of all that comfort, Marcus and his daughter had been made to feel like an inconvenience. Derek had already turned his attention back to the couple who had arrived after them. His voice changed the moment he spoke to them. It became warmer, brighter, polished in a way it had never been when he spoke to Marcus. He welcomed them with the kind of smile that belonged in brochures and advertisements. He asked about their trip. He complimented their luggage. He spoke about the hotel's amenities, as though he were personally proud of every polished surface in the building. Then, without even checking twice, he assigned them a room. Marcus watched the key card slide across the counter. That small movement told him everything. There had been rooms. There had always been rooms. The lie had never been about availability. It had been about appearance. Zoe lifted her face from Marcus's side and looked toward the desk. She was too tired to be fully upset, but she was old enough to sense when adults were being unfair. Her eyes followed Derek as he gave the other guests directions toward the elevator. Marcus looked down at her and gently adjusted the strap of her backpack. He had promised her a warm shower, room service, and a bed with too many pillows. Before their flight, he had told her that they would make a little adventure out of the night, even though they both knew they were tired. Zoe had smiled at that idea. She had spent most of the flight curled against him, holding the small stuffed rabbit she brought everywhere. Now, her excitement had disappeared. Marcus had learned long ago that children could feel humiliation before they knew the word for it. They could hear it in the tone adults used. They could see it in the way people looked away. They could sense it in the sudden stiffness of a room when someone decided they did not belong. Marcus had seen that truth in his own childhood. His father had worked as a night security guard for nearly 30 years. Not in one grand hotel, but in several. He had worked in office buildings, private clubs, luxury apartment towers, and restaurants where the customers spent in one evening what he earned in a month. He wore a uniform every night, stood near entrances for hours, opened doors for people who rarely looked at him, and walked empty hallways long after the city had gone quiet. Marcus remembered waiting up for him as a boy. He remembered the sound of his father's keys at the door after midnight. He remembered the tired way his father took off his shoes in the kitchen, trying not to wake anyone. He remembered the faint smell of rain, coffee, and the cold night air clinging to his coat. Most of all, he remembered how his father never complained. But children notice more than adults think. Marcus had heard enough fragments of conversation to understand that his father was treated differently by some people. He had heard about guests who snapped their fingers instead of saying hello. Managers who spoke to him as though he were invisible. People who assumed he was uneducated because he wore a uniform. People who called him only when they needed help, then looked through him the moment the problem was solved. His father had always told him that work had dignity, no matter what title came with it. But Marcus had also seen the sadness in his father's face on the nights when dignity was the only thing anyone had left him. That was why Marcus never forgot the feeling of being judged before being known. It was why he built his company with a different kind of promise. Years later, when Marcus had begun buying struggling hotels and turning them around, people had assumed his greatest advantage was his business instinct. They saw the growth, the renovations, the partnerships, the expansion into new cities. They saw a successful entrepreneur with a sharp eye for numbers and an even sharper eye for opportunity. What they did not always understand was that Marcus had never wanted to build hotels merely to create wealth. He wanted to create places where people felt human. He wanted every guest to feel welcome, whether they arrived in a suit or a sweatshirt, whether they had booked the penthouse or the smallest available room. whether they were famous, wealthy, tired, grieving, alone, or simply trying to make it through the night. He had built that principle into the company from the beginning. Respect before revenue, care before appearances, hospitality without judgment. Those were not slogans to Marcus, they were personal. And yet, standing in that lobby with Zoe half asleep beside him, he could feel those values slipping through the hands of people who had never understood them. Marcus finally looked at Derek again. He did not raise his voice. He did not demand attention. He simply asked whether Derek would be willing to check the system one more time. It was a reasonable request. A tired father asking for a room for his child. Nothing more. But Derek's smile faded. The warmth he had shown the wealthy couple vanished, as though someone had switched off a light. He stared at Marcus with the irritation of a man who believed he had already ended the conversation and should not have to repeat himself. He insisted that the hotel was fully booked. Then he added that Marcus might have better luck, somewhere more suitable. The words were carefully chosen. Derek did not say exactly what he meant. He did not need to. The insult lived in the pause before the final word. It lived in the look he gave Marcus's hoodie. It lived in the quick glance toward Zoe, as though the presence of a tired child made them even more out of place. Some of the nearby guests heard it. A woman seated near the lounge lowered her magazine and looked toward the desk. A man waiting beside the elevators glanced over his shoulder. The bell attendant near the entrance shifted slightly, uncertain whether he should pretend not to notice. Behind the desk, Maya stood very still. She had been watching from the beginning. Maya had worked at the hotel for almost 2 years. She was good at her job. She remembered guest preferences, kept track of small details, and treated nervous travelers with patience. She was the kind of employee who noticed when someone needed help before they asked for it. But she had also learned something during those 2 years. The hotel had rules on paper, and then it had unspoken rules in practice. Richard, the evening manager, had his favorites. Derek was one of them. Derek had been there longer. He knew how to flatter important guests. He knew how to make wealthy customers feel seen. He had a polished manner that management often mistook for excellence. But Maya had seen another side of him. She had watched him become impatient with guests who spoke with accents. She had seen him dismiss people who looked nervous about money. She had heard him make jokes in the break room about people who did not fit the image he believed the hotel should project. Maya had never agreed with him, but she had never openly challenged him either. She had told herself that she was trying to keep her job. She had told herself that speaking up would only make things worse. She had told herself that someone with more authority would eventually notice. But as she looked at Zoe, tired and confused beside her father, those excuses began to feel smaller. Maya could see the reservation screen from where she stood. She knew exactly how many rooms were available. There were 12 standard rooms still open, 4 junior suites, 2 family suites, and 1 corner suite on the 18th floor that had been held back for late arrivals. She could have said something. One sentence would have been enough. But fear had a way of making silence feel safer than truth. Marcus noticed her hesitation. He saw the way her eyes moved from the screen to Derek, then from Derek to Zoe. He saw the guilt settle into her face. He did not know her name yet, but he understood what he was seeing. Maya was not cruel. She was afraid. And fear, Marcus knew, could make good people stand still while something wrong unfolded in front of them. He turned his attention back to Derek. There was no anger in his voice when he asked whether he could speak with the manager. That request changed the atmosphere immediately. Derek's posture stiffened. For the first time that night, uncertainty flickered across his face. It lasted only a moment, but Marcus saw it. Derek knew that a manager could check the system. A manager could see that rooms were available. A manager could ask why a guest had been turned away while others were welcomed. But Derek also knew something else. Richard trusted him. And Richard had his own ideas about who belonged in the hotel. Derek disappeared through the door behind the desk. As he went, Maya kept her eyes on Marcus. She looked as though she wanted to apologize, but no words came. Zoe tugged gently at Marcus's sleeve. Her voice was quiet. She asked why the man at the desk did not want to help them. Marcus looked down at her, and for the first time that night, a little pain moved across his face. Not because Derek had insulted him. Marcus could handle that. He had spent his life learning how to survive other people's assumptions. What hurt was that Zoe had been pulled into it. She was young enough to believe hotels were places where people smiled at you, gave you little soaps, and told you where the elevators were. She had not yet learned that some adults treated kindness like a privilege instead of a responsibility. Marcus did not want that lesson to reach her tonight. So he told her, gently, that sometimes people made decisions before they knew the full story. He told her that it did not mean they were right. He told her that the way someone treated you said more about their character than it did about yours. Zoe listened quietly. Then she rested her head against him again. That simple gesture made the woman near the lounge look away for a moment. She suddenly seemed embarrassed to be watching. The businessman near the elevator checked his phone, but not because he had received a message. He was avoiding the discomfort in the air. The lobby had become a place where everyone could see the unfairness, but no one yet knew what to do about it. A few minutes later, Richard came through the back office door. He moved with the confidence of a man who had spent too long being obeyed. His suit was perfectly tailored. His tie was straight. His shoes were polished enough to reflect the lobby lights. He looked less like someone arriving to solve a problem and more like someone arriving to shut one down. Derek walked beside him, speaking in a low voice. Marcus could not hear every word, but he did not need to. Derek's body language told the story. He leaned toward Richard. He gestured toward Marcus. He shook his head as though he were describing an unreasonable guest, a disruptive guest, a difficult guest. By the time Richard reached the front desk, he had already chosen a side. He did not begin by asking Marcus what happened. He did not ask to see the reservation system. He did not ask Maya whether there were rooms available. He did not ask why another couple had been checked in moments after Marcus was told the hotel was full. Instead, he looked Marcus up and down. It was a brief glance, but it carried years of judgment. Marcus had seen that glance in boardrooms before people knew his name. He had seen it in restaurants when hosts assumed he was waiting for someone else. He had seen it in private meetings when executives assumed the older white man beside him was the real decision maker. Richard looked at Marcus the same way. Not as a guest, not as a father, not as a person who might deserve the benefit of the doubt, but as a problem. Richard asked what the issue was. Marcus explained calmly. He said he had asked for a room for himself and his daughter. He said Derek had told him there were none available. He said another couple had arrived after them and had been given a room immediately. He asked only that someone check the system honestly. His voice remained controlled. That made Richard even more dismissive. Richard listened with the shallow patience of someone pretending to be fair. Then he turned to Derek, who repeated the lie with more confidence now that his manager was standing beside him. Derek claimed that the rooms had been reserved for priority guests. Marcus asked what priority meant. Richard answered that certain reservations and memberships received special consideration. It was not a complete lie. Luxury hotels did have systems for priority guests, but it was not the truth either. The rooms Derek had assigned were not reserved for anyone. The couple had simply walked in, No special membership had been checked. No priority status had been confirmed. Richard was using policy as a shield, and Marcus recognized it immediately. Policies were supposed to guide people toward fairness, but in the wrong hands they became excuses for cruelty. Marcus asked Richard to show him the policy. Richard's expression hardened. The request was still calm, still reasonable, but Richard heard it as a challenge. He told Marcus that guests did not get to demand internal documents. He suggested that Marcus was misunderstanding how luxury hospitality worked. He said the hotel maintained certain standards and that the staff had the right to make decisions that protected the experience of its guests. The words were polished. The meaning was ugly. Marcus looked around the lobby. He noticed the guests listening now. He noticed Maya's hands trembling slightly near the keyboard. He noticed the security guard standing near the entrance, who had been quietly summoned by Derek while Richard spoke. The guard was a broad-shouldered man named Daniel. He had worked in security for years. Unlike Derek and Richard, he did not appear smug or pleased by the situation. He looked uncomfortable. His eyes moved from Marcus to Zoe, then back to Richard. Daniel had seen difficult guests before. He had dealt with yelling, threats, intoxicated visitors, stolen luggage, and arguments that got out of control. But Marcus was not shouting. He was not threatening anyone. He was standing quietly beside an exhausted little girl and asking why the truth could not be checked. Daniel knew the difference between a problem and a person being treated like one. Still, Richard had authority, and authority had a way of making decent people question their own instincts. Richard's voice grew colder. He told Marcus that the hotel was not able to accommodate him, and that it would be best for him to leave before the matter became more complicated. Marcus asked one final question. He asked Richard whether he was refusing him because there were truly no rooms available, or because Richard had decided Marcus did not look like the kind of guest the hotel wanted. For the first time, Richard looked genuinely irritated. His face tightened. His eyes shifted toward the other guests. He did not want to answer directly, because the truth would sound terrible out loud. So instead, he accused Marcus of trying to create a scene. That was the tactic. When people could not defend what they had done, they often changed the subject. They turned the victim's calm questions into aggression. They called truth inconvenient. They called dignity difficult. They hoped that embarrassment would force the other person to leave before anyone had to confront the real issue. Richard told Daniel to escort Marcus and Zoe outside. The words landed heavily in the lobby. Zoe looked up at her father again. This time, she did not ask why they could not have a room. She asked why the hotel workers were trying to make them leave when helping people was supposed to be their job. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the lobby more sharply than any shout could have. For a moment, no one moved. Derek looked away. Maya closed her eyes briefly, as though she could no longer bear to watch. Daniel took a step forward, then stopped. Richard's jaw tightened. The woman near the lounge placed her magazine on the table. The businessman by the elevator no longer pretended not to be listening. Even the couple Derek had just checked in looked uncomfortable now. They had come in expecting a quiet night at a luxury hotel. Instead, they were watching a tired father and child being treated as though they had done something wrong simply by walking through the door. Marcus felt Zoe's hand slip into his. He held it carefully. Then he looked at Daniel. Marcus did not blame him. He could see that Daniel was not enjoying this. He could see the conflict in his face. Daniel was being told to follow orders, and Marcus understood that jobs could make people feel trapped. So Marcus spoke to him with respect. He told Daniel that he wasn't there to cause trouble. He said he would not resist. He only wanted the hotel to be honest about why it was trying to remove him and his daughter. Daniel nodded slightly. It was the smallest gesture, but it mattered. Because in that moment, Daniel was no longer looking at Marcus through Richard's eyes. He was seeing him clearly. And once a person began to see clearly, it became harder to keep pretending nothing was wrong. Richard, however, had already gone too far to step back gracefully. He told Marcus that if he refused to leave, the situation could become more serious. The threat was unnecessary. That was what made it so revealing. Marcus had not raised his voice. He had not insulted anyone. He had not even stepped away from the desk. But Richard wanted the power of making him feel small. He wanted Marcus to understand that he could be removed, dismissed, and humiliated without anyone caring. What Richard did not understand was that Marcus had spent a lifetime learning that dignity did not come from other people's approval. It came from what you refused to become when they tried to strip it away. Marcus looked around one last time. The lobby he had helped design was full of details he remembered personally. The lighting had been chosen to feel warm instead of intimidating. The seating had been arranged so travelers would not feel exposed when they arrived tired or alone. The welcome desk had been lowered slightly on one side, so guests in wheelchairs could check in comfortably. The training manuals for every employee in the company had repeated the same principle. Every person who entered the building should be treated as though their dignity mattered. Now, standing in that same lobby, Marcus saw how easily beautiful buildings could hide ugly behavior. He saw how a company could print values on paper and still fail the moment no one believed someone important was watching. That was why he had never announced his visits in advance. Marcus often traveled without assistance, without security, and without the polished image people expected from a hotel owner. He wanted to know what happened when the staff thought they were dealing with ordinary people. He wanted to see whether kindness existed only when cameras were on, executives were present, or wealthy guests were nearby. Most of the time, he was proud of what he found. Tonight, he was not. He reached into the pocket of his hoodie and took out his phone. Derek watched with a faint smile, convinced Marcus was calling someone to complain. Richard assumed he was calling for a ride. Neither man looked worried. In their minds, they had already decided who Marcus was. A tired man, a rejected guest, someone with no power, someone they could push out of the building and forget by morning. Marcus scrolled through his contacts, found a number, and made one call. He did not speak loudly. He did not explain everything. He only said that he was at the downtown property, that there had been a serious failure in guest treatment, and that he needed Thomas Webb to come to the lobby immediately. Then he ended the call. Richard gave a short, humorless laugh. He asked whether Marcus was trying to intimidate the staff. Marcus did not answer. He simply looked at Zoe, then back at the front desk. The wait that followed felt longer than it really was. Maya stood frozen behind the counter, staring at the phone in Marcus's hand. Something about the way he had made the call unsettled her. It had not sounded like a complaint. It had not sounded like desperation. It had sounded like someone giving a calm instruction to a person who would understand exactly what it meant. Daniel noticed it too. The security guard shifted his stance and looked toward Richard. For the first time, doubt had become visible in his face. Derek tried to cover his discomfort by pretending nothing had changed. He began organizing papers on the desk. Richard straightened his tie. The couple who had checked in quietly stepped away from the counter, suddenly unsure whether they wanted to be part of what was happening. And then, from the far end of the lobby, the elevator doors opened. A tall man in a dark suit stepped out quickly. His name was Thomas Webb. He was the chief executive officer of the entire hotel group, and he was walking toward Marcus with an expression that made Derek, Richard, and Maya realize that the man in the gray hoodie was not who they thought he was. Not even close. Thomas Webb did not slow down as he crossed the lobby. The moment he saw Marcus standing beside Zoe, his entire expression changed. The urgency in his face was obvious, but what stunned everyone watching was the respect behind it. Thomas was not approaching Marcus like a manager coming to calm down an upset guest. He was approaching him like someone who had just realized that a serious failure had taken place under the roof of the man who owned the entire company. Derek noticed it first. The confidence that had carried him through the evening disappeared almost instantly. His fingers stopped moving across the desk. His shoulders stiffened. He looked from Thomas to Marcus, then back to Thomas again, as though his mind could not make sense of what he was seeing. Richard's reaction was slower, but even more painful to watch. For several long seconds, he stood perfectly still. He had been so certain of himself moments earlier. He had believed the hotel belonged to people who looked polished, wealthy, and important. He had believed his title gave him the power to decide who deserved patience and who deserved humiliation. But now the chief executive officer of the entire hotel group was walking straight past him, not toward Derek, not toward the front desk, toward Marcus. Thomas reached Marcus and immediately apologized. He did not apologize in the vague, polished language managers often used when they wanted a problem to disappear. He apologized with the seriousness of a man who understood the damage had already been done. He said that he had come as quickly as he could. He said he had received Marcus's message and understood that something deeply wrong had happened. Then, in front of every guest, every employee, and every person who had watched the situation unfold, Thomas addressed Marcus with the title no one in that lobby had expected to hear. "Mr. Johnson." The silence became absolute. Maya's eyes widened. Daniel, the security guard, looked at Marcus again, but this time with a completely different understanding. The exhausted father in the gray hoodie was not simply a guest who had been treated unfairly. He was Marcus Johnson, the founder and owner of the hotel group. The man whose name appeared in annual reports, corporate training materials, investor conferences, and internal company messages. The man who had built the very hotel where Richard had tried to throw him out. Derek's face lost its color. Richard looked as though the floor beneath him had shifted. But Marcus did not look triumphant. That was what made the moment even heavier. He did not smile. He did not step forward to embarrass them. He did not enjoy the fear in their faces. Instead, he looked down at Zoe, whose hand was still wrapped around his, then back at Thomas. Marcus told him that he had come to the hotel after a long flight with his daughter. He had asked for one room. He had been told there were none available. Then he had watched another couple receive a room only moments later. He explained that when he asked for clarification, he had been treated as a problem. When he asked for a manager, he had been judged before anyone checked the facts. And when he refused to accept a lie, he and his tired child had been threatened with removal from the building. Thomas listened without interrupting. His expression grew harder with every sentence. Marcus did not exaggerate. He did not need to. The truth was already standing in front of everyone. The reservation system was behind the desk. Maya had seen the available rooms. Daniel had heard Richard's order. The guests nearby had witnessed Derek's sudden change in attitude when the well-dressed couple entered. There was no confusion left, only accountability. Thomas turned to Richard first. He asked whether Marcus's account was accurate. Richard opened his mouth, but for the first time that night, he had no polished explanation ready. He tried to say that there had been a misunderstanding. He claimed that Derek had been following procedure. He suggested that the situation had become difficult because Marcus had challenged the staff in front of other guests. But even as he spoke, the weakness of his words became obvious. He had not checked the system. He had not asked Maya what she saw. He had not investigated the available rooms. He had not shown concern for Zoe. He had only looked at Marcus and decided that someone dressed like him did not deserve the same respect as someone dressed in expensive clothes. Thomas asked Richard a simple question. He asked whether the hotel's standards included judging guests by their appearance. Richard could not answer, because there was only one honest answer, and everyone knew it. Then Thomas turned to Derek. Derek tried to defend himself by claiming he had assumed the rooms needed to be held for preferred guests. He said he had been trying to protect the hotel's reputation. He said that he had not intended to insult Marcus or Zoe. But Marcus looked at him with a calm disappointment that was more powerful than anger. He told Derek that the problem was not whether Derek knew his identity. The problem was that Derek had believed it was acceptable to lie to a father and child because he thought they had no power. Marcus explained that respect was not something guests earned by wearing the right clothes. It was not a reward for wealth, status, or influence. It was the minimum every person deserved before anyone knew their name. Derek lowered his eyes. He had no answer for that either. Thomas asked Maya to step forward. At first, she looked frightened. She had spent the entire evening trapped between what she knew was right and what she feared might happen if she spoke. Her hands were shaking slightly as she came around the desk. She looked at Marcus, then at Thomas, then at Richard. Thomas asked her whether rooms had been available. Maya hesitated. For one painful second, it seemed as though fear might win again. Then she looked at Zoe. The little girl was still tired, still quiet, still holding her father's hand. But there was something about seeing Zoe there that finally broke through Maya's silence. She told the truth. She said there had been rooms available from the beginning. She said Derek knew it. She said she had seen open rooms in the system. She admitted that she had been afraid to challenge him because Richard always took Derek's side. She admitted that she should have spoken sooner. Her voice trembled as she said it. But once the truth started, it did not stop. Maya explained that this was not the first time Derek had judged guests based on appearance. She had seen him speak differently to people who seemed wealthy and important. She had seen him dismiss guests who looked uncertain, tired, or out of place. She had kept quiet because she had believed that speaking up would cost her the job she needed. Richard looked at her with disbelief, not because he was shocked by what Derek had done, but because he was shocked that Maya had finally found the courage to say it. Thomas listened carefully. Then he asked Daniel what he had witnessed. The security guard looked toward Richard, then toward Marcus.